one more thing.
Good evening, everybody. We'll call to order the Milton School Committee meeting for January 22nd, 2025. And first, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Sorry, my phone keeps I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, good evening, everybody. So first we will approve our agenda for tonight. One suggestion has been to move, we are joined this evening by one of our student representatives, and we have the idea to move your report up within the superintendent's report before the Pierce Site Council presentation. Are there any other changes to the agenda as listed here? All right. So then we can go ahead and approve our agenda for tonight. And the first item is public comment. So just as a reminder, we include public comment on our agendas as an opportunity for us to hear from members of our community, whom we invite to share their perspectives with us for up to 3 minutes apiece. And we do not respond directly to individuals' comments. If they are speaking to topics that we have listed on our agenda, then we may be able to sort of respond to questions or concerns that have been raised in the course of our discussions. Do we have anybody present for public comment this evening, either in person and or online? Okay, we have a couple of people in person. Mark, can you see if we have anybody on? If you're online and intending to speak in public comment, please
Recording
raise
in
your
progress.
hand. We'll go ahead and get started with our attendees who are joining us in person this evening. So if you would come, just introduce yourself for the record, and thank you so much for taking time to join us.
Good evening. My name's Karen Friedman Hanna. I am a town meeting member from Precinct 2. I'm a past president of Congregation Beth Shalom of the Blue Hills. I'm a mom of a teacher in the high school. I'm a mom of kids who went through the programs here and are very proud of the school system, very involved all along the way. So I appreciate all the work that all of you do and are doing. I rise tonight to bring concern and hopefully consideration for viewing the topic about the holidays in the schools. Considering rather than removing some to make it more equal in representation, or maybe not as focused on the different holidays for different cultures, I urge you to consider the opposite. Right now, our country is very focused on becoming more of a Christian nation. And those who practice Christianity may not feel it as much as those of us who don't. There has been a tremendous rise, I think all of you know, in anti-Semitism and anti-everything other than Christianity. Different faith groups have been persecuted differently. Everything going on in Israel hasn't helped, certainly. The political spectrum has changed considerably, and there's been a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism, which is what I can relate to most, but I feel it and I've heard it from other people of other faiths, how much they feel where they feel that they have a lower standing in our country than others. And that's really unfortunate in so many ways. Milton has been a very diverse community always. We moved here, our family moved here in 1994 because it was one of the more diverse communities around. That's what we were looking for. And we proudly have been a part of various interfaith things and other things with our synagogue. I worked closely with Rabbi Benjamin, with Superintendent Gormley, to get the policy in place that is currently in place with the holidays, with being able to have at least one of the high holy days. It's not just any holiday, it's the highest holy day set of holidays that there are. And especially, you may or may not know, with Yom Kippur being the holiest of the days, that's the one where anybody over the age of bar mitzvah age or bat mitzvah age are supposed to fast for the day. So it's really a very poignant day of atonement. A lot of thought has to go into the day, and it's very powerful and meaningful. So the idea that it's being considered to be taken away when it's been basically recognized for 30 years now in some way or another is very upsetting and very concerning. Rather, I would suggest, if possible, to consider half days for some days that are already in the calendar, and adding not only, or keeping not only the Jewish holiday the way it stands, but considering adding Diwali and Eid and the Lunar New Year, because those faith groups deserve to have it recognized also. And in a time when it's so contentious around faith in our country, why don't we have Milton be a leader rather than not taking a stand in that way? And I know it's not intentional to have it feel like it's not intentional to have it feel like there's that something is being taken away, but optics matter, and the feeling of people who follow those faiths matter. And so please consider it to have half days in some ways. Day before Christmas does not need to be a full day. Other days where it's professional development maybe could be half a day, and make up the 3 days that way. I think we can be creative.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
letting us know your thoughts. Okay. Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Hi, good evening. My name is Rob Milt. I'm the parent of 3 Milton Public School students, including a newly registered voter, who is here with me tonight. So as Karen mentioned, every year since 1994, so for 30 years, Yom Kippur has been not a school day, and since 2011, either Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah has been observed. What's really changed in those 30 years? The school-age population has become more diverse, and I think that really requires you, as Karen pointed out, to work creatively and expansively regarding the schedule, as well as the curriculum. So really, why contract the calendar now when it does not need to be, as Karen mentioned? So past school committees provided students and staff the opportunity to participate in the holiest days of the Jewish calendar, free of academic, social, and professional pressures. These days provide our students with a critical emotional and social bulwark. These students have not needed to make the wrenching and frankly demoralizing decision whether to attend class when their faith demands otherwise, their faith traditions. So in these 3 decades, these students have not needed to ask themselves, am I going to be perceived as too Jewish by my peers if I'm not going to go to school today? Am I not Jewish enough if I don't? Should I set aside my commitments to my education, to my lab mates in biology or chemistry? If I take these 2 days off, like students will need to if these days are removed from the calendar, because both Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah this coming school year fall during the school week, not on the weekends. Will I get behind my classes? Will it be more difficult for me to get into college? Will I lose my starting position on the team? Additionally, I think it's also a fallacy to suggest that if we remove these high holy days from the calendar, we'll get a better sense if Jewish students are actually taking those days off. It is unfair to place this very adult burden on children by demanding that they take what essentially is a de facto religious litmus test, essentially the same burden that other students of other religions are facing now, including Muslim students. So I urge you to create a district calendar that is inclusive, creates a sense of belonging in our increasingly diverse community, maintaining the current policy is appropriate and fair and furthers these goals. So I ask you to keep these days on the calendar. I encourage you to work with the bargaining units and parents, because I understand that the majority would like to potentially strike these days from our calendar, and having classes maybe prior to Labor Day, having half-day classes on Wednesdays. Be creative, find solutions, because I think the situation demands it. So I understand these proposed changes involve sacrifice and changes for parents and bargaining units, but I urge you to take these things on to challenge these sort of secular sacred days, like the Friday before Labor Day, and in pursuit of equality amongst all the Abrahamic faiths. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody online wishing to participate in public comment? If so, can you raise your hand at this time, please? Okay. Don't see any hands raised online. Is there anyone else in person in the audience who would like to participate in public comment? Okay. Thank you very much. So we will have the opportunity for members, to the extent you want to continue considering points that have just been raised. Obviously, we are going to be discussing once again the calendar this evening, later on in our meeting, so we'll have the opportunity. But thank you very much to the members of our community who took time to come and share your perspectives with us. Thank you. With that, we'll turn to the superintendent's report.
Thank you. A few things to report that we have been working on. A couple of events coming up. So a lot of people at this table and some over there in attendance are going to be at the Kindergarten Information Night, which is tomorrow night. We are welcoming all of our incoming kindergarten parents and going through all things MPS. It's an hour long. As mentioned, it's virtual, and will be an exciting way to kind of talk about the things that we do to help people get accustomed to all the great things that are happening. And as you all may remember, as a kindergarten parent, there is a lot of incredible excitement. So we try to capitalize on that and really kind of help people get off on the right foot. The teaching and learning sessions, which I think were really, really great, finished last week. So we had our final two last week. I think as we go into the spring and look at other ways to reach out to community, I'll be working with principals to think about kind of like where do we go in terms of a next conversation. I do think as we work on one of our action teams is working on parent and community engagement and looking at not just kind of doing the same things every year, but really looking at ways to engage in different kinds of ways. I want to kind of go from what we've learned from these teaching and learning sessions and kind of build forward and talk about other ways that we can kind of like make our interactions with the community different in ways that are really affirming for everybody. I think we have kind of a predilection in education to have a lot of content, and then we want to just deliver the content as opposed to engaging together in the content and kind of building understanding together. And I think that's it's powerful, and it has long-lasting impacts in terms of like kind of a joint caring and support for students. So that will be kind of the intention that we'll be bringing as we look at the spring and the other kinds of engagement we want to do. Val and I met with some students, the Asian American student group at the high school, which was really fun last week. And they're going to be leading the Lunar New Year celebration, which is really cool. That's on February 8th from 5 to 7, is that right?
Yes.
At Pierce Middle School. And what was really cool about that was just how engaged the students were, like, and how much they really wanted to share and be a part and lead, and just kind of made me realize what an untapped resource I think our students are in terms of giving them an opening. They are totally ready to run.
Yep.
I know Selena does this in her work outside of being a school committee member, and probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. We are working with principals. We're going to talk a little bit later about kind of where we are with our FY25 financial situation. So we have been spending over the last couple weeks, we've been working with principals to share kind of where we are and what steps that we can take to work on some of the challenges we're facing with finances. So there's more to come on that, but I did want to share that that's been a focus since we last met. This week I met with superintendents from across the metro area. Everyone is comparing and contrasting how they're responding to the competency determination. So that is basically the MCAS graduation requirement, and it's written in the law as a competency determination. So everyone is comparing how they are locally meeting this requirement. In a lot of ways, I think the reality for almost every district that I talked to was we're doubling down on our grad requirements. So we're keeping our grad requirements as the competency determination. And the state is kind of continuing to look at, now that ballot 2 passed, they're going back to the drawing board right now to figure out kind of what's next. So I think for the near term, locally, districts have set their graduation requirements as this is what we believe a student needs. The competency determination was a state requirement. So I think we're going to be working to make sure that, obviously our competency determination will be the standards required by the state are matched in our curricula. And then we'll kind of be watching and waiting with the state to make sure as they're working on developing whatever kind of 2.0 is of the determination, that we're kind of part of the development of that. And there's a team at the high school who I've been meeting with, so there are lots of people putting their heads on this and looking at some of the unique circumstances. Most districts, yesterday in the meeting I was in, we're talking about we have 5 or 10 students that, with the MCAS going away, if we go back to the grad requirements, they actually had this other kind of circuitous path. If we require, like, for example, a lab science course and an English 10 course, maybe some of our EL students had a different pathway to graduation than specific courses articulated in that. So we're talking about that just to make sure we're seeing every single student and making sure that we don't create some sort of new process that requires some of our students who would have been successful to all of a sudden hit a new roadblock. So that's the update on that, and that's my report.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah.
that? So, currently, the only change for this year would be the MCAS, so passing the MCAS, but the other graduation requirements remain the same. So there's no other change other than not needing to pass that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, definitely there are districts that are concerned about, where do we go from here with MCAS? And I think that was a concern that I shared with you all, like in the absence of a better assessment, which I think everyone agrees there could be a better, more comprehensive multimodal type of assessment for students instead of just the MCAS. But now we're kind of left with, we're a little bit, we don't quite know exactly where we are. So I do think there's going to be a push from the Superintendent's Association, at least with DESE and the state, to respond to the absence of an assessment with something new in terms of this requirement. But yeah, there's essentially no change for us here. And there is concern that we're going to start to see MCAS scores drop because it's no longer a requirement for graduation. So that was voiced by a lot of districts too.
So is there you might have just said this, is there like a task force, or is it the superintendent? Like, who's responsible for determining what the new competency requirement would be and what it looks like, and then taking into account the reasons why it was voted down? Like, who's?
So that would fall to DESE.
Okay.
And I heard rumblings, and it was in the Globe like maybe 3 weeks ago. There was an article about it, just kind of intimating that people were starting to talk about it. But I don't think anything has formalized yet. I think once a task force is put together, they would bring in representatives from all the different bodies to look at that and kind of figure out a way forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions or discussion on the report from Dr. Burrows?
I mean, Massachusetts was seen. I think the MCAS was one of the things that kind of put Massachusetts on the map educationally, nationally, in terms of kind of this era of high standards. So I think it's interesting right now to kind of like figure out kind of like what is the response to not having that assessment anymore in terms of making sure that we continue to have those high standards.
Sorry. So, Bow. So thank you for your report. Sorry for my technical issue here. And Bow, would you like to introduce the next part with our student representative report? We're fortunate to be joined this evening by one of our student representatives.
Yes. Let me find my information. One second. Yes, we have Olivia Wilson, 10th grader, student representative from the Milton High School joining us tonight. And she's going to bring us a short report from what they have done at the student advisory group.
Great, thanks.
Let's welcome Olivia.
Thank you, Olivia, for coming.
Yes, so as Brown said, I'm Olivia Wolfson. I represent the 10th graders along with Adam, but it's just me here tonight. So like for the whole year, probably like once a month, me and all the other school committee members have been meeting with Superintendent Burrows and Member Bow to chat about the goings on, I guess, and like make sure that we're connecting with you guys with issues that are relevant like to the student body as well, and making sure that there's that connection there. In the past, we like tackled like the calendar issues, and we brought you guys that survey that once again, like it got the student perspective as well, which is I feel like our main thing, like bringing that voice to you guys. Now our new thing is cell phone policy. That's something that we're really trying to figure out, and we're choosing that for a lot of reasons. I mean, I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with the news on it, but like nationally, it's a super big topic right now. If you look across the school systems, there's been like the range of ways of dealing with cell phones has been like immense. So we're just trying to figure out for our system, for our situation, like what's the best move. And I feel like it's an issue that students, staff, and parents all have incredibly strong opinions on. So like if we can bring you that kind of perspective, that's something we definitely want to do, because whatever decision is made, there's going to be feelings about it. So if we can have like data, that kind of thing to back that up, that's something that we we're into. So right now we're making a survey that we're gonna send out to high school and middle school students, staff, and parents. And what we're really interested in looking at is how answers range from like middle school students to high school students, because I'm not sure if you guys know all this stuff, but the policies are slightly different from the middle school to the high school. And when kids come through the high school, through that system, there's been talk about like that inconsistency. So we want to see where is it working, where is it not, and like what's good and bad about both ways that we're doing things. So like we're gonna gather that information. There's a lot of the parents, there's like safety concerns with phones, but then there's also like, do we want to be offline and connected with our friends and stuff? So it's just such a vast issue. So we're gonna like kind of bring you guys the data on that. So in the next few meetings, whenever we can get that out, someone else will be here to tell you about that. But yeah, we just letting you guys know, like moving forward, there's gonna be one school committee representative at all these meetings, and just kind of do what I did today and like give you a little update on what we're up to. And as we gather information on whatever we find relevant, we will share it with you guys so that it can help you make informed decisions.
Thank you, Olivia.
Quick question for you. Do you have a timeline for this survey or the gathering of the data?
Yeah, so we're like nearing the end of a term right now in school, so it's like pretty crazy. So that ends January 27th. So we're looking early February to get that out, because it'll be hard for us to put it together, but also kids are going to be so busy they won't be answering that kind of stuff. So early February, get that out there. That's like our goal for sure.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for Olivia?
I think it's a great topic to take on and really be interested in y'all's perspective, the students' perspective. So thank you for leading on that.
And it's great to anticipate getting to see our student representatives in our mix more consistently. That will be really wonderful. So thank you all for sort of sorting that out. We know you're very busy and you have a lot keeping you occupied in the evening. So
Yeah.
thanks for being here with us tonight.
I think we're really excited about it, so it should be good.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bao, for your work
It's the
in
teamwork.
cultivating these connections. Okay. So next, under the superintendent's report, we're excited to have our Pierce Middle School Site Council with us this evening. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here. You can, yep, come on up. I know my fifth grader is eagerly anticipating her visit to Pierce tomorrow to see Annie Jr. Hopefully a lot of us are planning to go check it out ourselves, but yeah, I think you're all going to have a very exciting day tomorrow.
We're looking forward to welcoming 380 or so fifth graders for the morning. I'm glad you brought that up, Lizzie, because some of what we wanted to cover as part of our presentation tonight is some of the more deliberate work that we've been engaged in around strengthening our structures and systems around the transition from elementary to middle school. So, does somebody have the slides? Was somebody control? Step ahead of me.
Hey, there we go.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. Well, first of all, we always welcome the opportunity to come to meet with the committee to share some updates. And while we've been instructed by Dr. Burrows to keep our presentation about 15 minutes or so, I will do my best. But it's not an easy ask given all the great things that are going on in our school and in our school community. Just to introduce our site council, in my now 14 years as a school principal, I've never seen so much engagement from a site council, both from the numbers of parents and family members who expressed interest in joining from the beginning to those who consistently attend our meetings on a regular basis. I think it's exciting to often bring back returning members, but also to see the interest and the fortune that we've had in adding new members every year. Been incredibly lucky to have such a wealth and diversity of experiences join the council. And I want to thank and acknowledge Monique DeBarros, who's here tonight in person, Rachel Posar, who's here in person, and I saw Dr. Idia Thurston, I think is still online. So we appreciate their engagement. It's a meeting I know we look forward to monthly, just to dig in and both the main charges of leading a school improvement plan, but also to engage in dialogue around our kids' experiences at Pierce. What are we doing well, and where are opportunities to continue to grow? So we'll get to the school improvement plan focus areas, initiatives, and so on shortly. But at the end of the day, our students will always be the focus and the purpose of our work. And at Pierce, as a school community, we're committed to being there to support, to lead, and to guide our children through what is arguably one of the greatest times of development. From obviously the physical development that we see, that in the physical changes that happen during those ages of 11 to 14, seeing students gain confidence as learners, and also that ever so delicate increase in knowledge and awareness of themselves as people and as others. And one of the things that, as a leader of a school, that I'm most proud of is that shared commitment that our faculty have for not just recognizing it, but appreciating and celebrating that we have students coming. We have 1,006 students this year coming to us with all different, from all different backgrounds, experiences, and values. But to be able to meet each of those students where they are when they come through our door and have a genuine, sincere appreciation for where they are in their development as early adolescents, I think is something that has allowed us to really stand out as a school that does right by kids. We'll take a short look at our school profile. And the story of enrollment is not one that's new to the school committee or to the community. Our current and projected enrollments are going to have to be a substantive part of how we educate our community about our needs in the near future. And while the prospect of a school building project will eventually alleviate space issues throughout the district, the reality is that our enrollment continues to outpace staffing that we've added. And while we were incredibly fortunate to add 2 positions for FY25, where we were able to make our 4th 4-teacher team in 6th grade, and we can talk tonight about the gains that we have seen there. It's easy to argue that we are still, the middle school has historically been underserved when it comes to addressing personnel needs, right? And we can see why that happens, right? In elementary school, students are younger, they're learning to read, they're learning how to be students, and then in high school, we're getting students ready for the transition to post-secondary. And I think there have been times historically, not just in Milton, but everywhere, where the middle school can sometimes be an afterthought when we're thinking about personnel needs. And that it's something that, in addition to navigating and negotiating the space issues that we find ourselves in, is really keeping the conversation about how our student enrollments are, and how our staffing is keeping up with our student enrollment needs. And we'll circle back to this throughout the presentation. But as we talk about Pierce Middle School and what it means to be a student at Pierce Middle School, one of the things that I think comes out of the words that come out of my mouth most often is this commitment to creating a culture where students can thrive. We've had an outstanding start to the school year. It's really hard to believe we're at the halfway point already. But this year, we've had a continued focus on creating experiences and structures for students that contribute to that thriving school culture. We'll spend some time now sharing some of the specific moves we made to both complement the academic program, and to continue to build a climate and atmosphere at school that is dynamic, inclusive, and supportive. Some specific examples of our work on school culture. We have that acronym, our peers' values: perseverance, integrity, equity, responsibility, community, and excellence. We, over the course of the past few years as a faculty, have developed those values, not just to have in a mission statement, not just to hang in our handbooks, but to really have these values that we point to, that we believe that we want our kids to have, we want to engender in them as a result of their experience. And it's one thing to say that we want our students to persevere, or that we want students to have integrity, but it's another to provide them with opportunities to practice that, to grow that. And related to that, one of the things that I know that Janice, Matt, and I are all committed to is catching kids doing the right thing. And we've used those values to celebrate achievements, sometimes small, sometimes large, of students' demonstration of these values. So we start the school year for the past 2 years with a special schedule in which we explicitly teach students about these values. What does perseverance look like in math? What does integrity look like in social studies? What does excellence look like across the board in all content areas? And then throughout the year, we hold community meetings in collaboration with all of our grade level teachers and teams to celebrate students' demonstration of these values. And I know Matt had his 7th grade community meeting yesterday, Janice did hers today, and during these meetings, it's an opportunity for teachers to call out their students for their demonstration of these values. And it's important for students to be recognized. It's also important for other students to see their peers being recognized. And one of the things that I find very heartwarming is seeing students be excited for being excited for their peers to be recognized, because they see them doing the right thing. And it's important that when we have those opportunities with 325 8th graders or 341 7th graders and all their staff, to be able to really to call them out and to show our recognition and appreciation for what they're doing. We continue to have, in this focus on building a culture where students thrive, an emphasis on belonging and connection, and the belief that both belonging and connection are essential elements to a strong school culture. Ways that we've continued to do that, our 6th grade seminar class has continued to be one of the most impactful experiences for many of our students, having that touch point throughout their day and school year where they come in from 4 unique elementary communities into this really large middle school, and to have this opportunity for shared experiences, to learn what it's like to be a member of a community, to explicitly learn executive functioning and organizational skills, and then to eventually fold that into some more academic work where all students are reading. For example, all 6th grade students are reading Restart right now. So there's the evolution of the course starts with bringing them in as young 6th graders, and then helps to develop their identity through these shared experiences. And we believe we're seeing more gains as it relates to that sense of connection and belonging that we strive to instill. And also related to connection and belonging and culture, I know last year we highlighted our responding to bias, a series of lessons on responding to bias. For any of you who have paid attention in the community for years before the past 2, many schools, Pierce included, often found itself responding to unexpected or unwanted situations around racial aggression, anti-Semitism, hate speech, and what we were often just trying to play catch up and say, condemn the behavior, condemn the action, and then teach our students why that was wrong. Over the course of the past 2 years, we have taken a very proactive approach, and we use our many of the early release days to do school-wide lessons that focus on equipping students and faculty, for that matter, members of our community, with habits of mind, language that help them to be better people and to be able to be upstanders and recognize and to intervene when wrong is happening, when harm is happening. So this while they may seem, sometimes it's not easy to see how they're all related, but at the end of the day, each of these moves is about community, climate, culture, connection, and belonging. And we'll get into a few more of the specifics about what our students have been experiencing throughout the year this year. But for now, Mark, if you wouldn't mind advancing this slide, we'll zoom out and take a look at the 3-year school improvement plan that was recently authored through the leadership of our site council. Our previous plan sunsetted at the end of the last school year, and where in looking at the development of this plan, we looked at where was some of the unfinished work from the previous school improvement plan, what from data that we had collected through site council, through student learning and achievement data, through other sources, where we're in looking at in the context of the district's implementation plan, where are our opportunities over the next 3 years to continue to move the needle forward from Pierce Middle School. So we have the same 4 priority areas that were identified in the previous school improvement plan, which are school culture, student well-being and engagement, teaching, learning, and academic excellence, creating and sustaining a data culture, and facility, staffing, and enrollment. So tonight we'll highlight some of the specific work that we've been engaged at throughout the year. But before we do, I think it's important to explicate that connection between the school improvement plan and the implementation plan. So you can see for yourself, but it's important if we talk a lot about coherence in our goals and our efforts and our priorities, but to be able to crosswalk Pierce Middle School's 4 school improvement goals in the context of the implementation plan, you see a lot of natural alignment. This wasn't something where we were trying to fit previous goal language into a new implementation plan. A lot of what we've learned through the work that Dr. Burrows led last year through the listening and learning tours and engaging with our community, not surprisingly, centered our work in these 4 identified areas. I think it's important to demonstrate that these improvement plans don't operate in isolation, right? It's part of it's our school's specific moves, strategies, and efforts to move ourselves forward, but also with a responsibility to the district. So there, I believe you have a full copy of the plan, but rather than going through that, all whatever 11 pages of it, what we wanted to do is highlight for the committee some of the focus areas and highlights for this school year. What is it that we're engaged with on a day-to-day basis? And you'll see, Mark, if you don't mind advancing that. The 3 focus areas that were born out of the school improvement plan that are of highest priority this year are high quality instructional practices, getting to know our students through a data lens, and establishing systems and structures that support students' transition to middle school. So when we start by when we look at academic excellence and high quality instruction, academic excellence and high quality instruction are at the forefront of our work every day, period. We are a school, that's what we are. We're here for teaching and learning. So last spring, as a faculty, and in reflecting on a lot of the conversations that had been had through the work led by Dr. Burrows, we pondered questions around, in thinking about what is academic excellence. You can ask everybody at this table and get a different answer, right? And none of them is more right or wrong than the other. So we dug in a little bit and we asked our educators, what does high quality instruction look like? In our day-to-day, what are we doing as classroom teachers, service providers, that is going to move the needle and raise the bar for all students learning? And so we engaged our educators in a survey around their practices. We did some collaborative analysis of educator feedback with the goal of reaching some consensus. So you've seen through the slides this commitment to high leverage moves. So here, enter high leverage moves. Through data collection, conversation, and consensus building, these high leverage moves were identified as a commitment by all Pierce educators to the answer question, what should every student expect every day in their classes, regardless of grade level, discipline, sort of agnostic of all that. And where we landed on were these, what we call our 4 high leverage moves. So what does this look like in practice? As I said a minute ago, these are the aspects of teaching and learning that we say all students should expect every day, in every class. So we talk about learning objectives, making learning goals clear to students. Students need to know what they're learning, not only what they're learning, but why, and have tools to measure progress and to self-assess their progress. Having routines, we know, especially as young adolescents, having a routine, knowing what to expect, and eliminating as much as we can the unexpected puts us in a better position to learn. It's teachers' commitment to varying instructional practices. Right? What we spent 2 years ago a lot of time working with Novak on universal design for learning, bringing that what we know about UDL into our planning and into our instruction, and providing students with multiple entry points for their learning. And then ultimately the work of using data and feedback we're collecting to tailor learning opportunities and experiences to meet the needs of all of our students. And that data piece of it segues nicely into, Mark, if you don't mind advancing the slide, the work around building and sustaining a data culture that is focused on advancing outcomes for students. So you may have heard from previous Site Council presentations, the through line of our PD focus this year with our Unit A staff has been getting to know our students through the data lens. And throughout the fall, each of the professional days focused on getting to know our kids through data lens in a different way. In September, we started by identifying and analyzing a variety of data sources. In identifying those sources, looking for emergent trends, identifying priorities, and identifying strategies to remediate gaps. And then in October, all of our staff were trained on Performance Matters, so that tool embedded in Power School that has all of our warehouse data, from historical MCAS data to iRated screeners and so on, and using those data to look at students' trajectory over time with regard to MCAS, with regard to iRated screener data, looking back at the data sources they had used previously in the fall, and then fast forward to December, where we used, again, Performance Matters to leverage the data that was collected through the SEL and DEIB screener data analysis, and look, so the culture and belonging data, and being able to look both at school level data, where are we doing more holistic, how are we doing more holistically, but then looking more closely as classroom teachers at the individual students. So having those tools and having that focus and having the professional development time to do that, we have seen some exciting gains in getting at that goal of getting to know our students better through data. Another specific move that worth highlighting in building and sustaining a data culture. Kat DeRoche, our K-8 literature director, Brian Seelig, our K-12 math director, and I have been working with our the Pierce Math and ELA teachers around looking at their teacher level MCAS data. It's common to look at student level data. It's common to look at the whole grade data for specific content areas. But one thing we hadn't looked at was the teachers' classroom data. So how, if I'm a 7th grade math teacher, how are my students performing? How are they achieving and how are they growing relative to the rest of the 7th grade? And looking at that over a 3-year trend. So in doing that, we wanted to provide teachers with that opportunity to do that analysis and to do that reflection. And we knew that for some staff, it could have push them a little in ways maybe they weren't ready or they weren't comfortable doing. And for others, they do this as a matter of good practice. So what we did, we created, we culled all the data, and using a protocol that asked them, just a simple protocol, what do you see? What do the data suggest? What are the implications? We gave staff, we took a very UDL approach. We gave them the option of either doing the analysis independently or doing it collaboratively with Brian and me, or collaboratively with Kat and me. And what we have seen have been some really exciting analysis and some outcomes from that, which we're already seeing teachers making adjustment to their practices, sharing successful practices. Some of our teachers who are consistently having mean student growth percentiles in the 60s and 70s being able to share with their colleagues whose students may not be growing at the same rate. Teachers using analysis from this exercise to set goals for students, particularly around their growth, right? Moving those students who are vulnerable to either being partially meeting to meeting. How do you move the 494 students from 494 to 504, and now from out of partially meeting and into meeting expectations? So that work paired with the getting to know students through the data lens has really put a more individualized focus on using that data for individual students. And now we have teachers now who are thinking about how can they use the data, their teacher level data, to inform their student learning goals throughout as part of the evaluation process moving forward. So I would say in terms of with my instructional leadership, this has been a move for me this year that I have felt really connected to the teaching and learning, the data analysis, and being able to work with and think closely and collaboratively with our staff to help to continue to move forward in the spirit of continuous improvement. So just one final highlight, and this is something that, in looking at the structures and systems that support the transition to middle school, Dr. Burrows and I started this conversation probably, Peter, last winter. And honestly, it came out of, I had initially requested that we make the Welcome to Middle School camp, which was sort of the universal, intended to be the universal strategy for orientation, paid for by the district. And there were a variety of hurdles to that, particularly, specifically just to fund it. So we talked through how can we achieve the same goals that have equipped lots of students to be successful in the transition, but do it differently. And the history of Welcome to Middle School camp, it's a great experience for many students. But I'm going to emphasize many, because it's not all. Students have an option at the end of the school year, or an option at the end of the summer. The students who attended, the feedback from students is always positive, same from parents. But what we were finding is only about 80% of our students were attending, and the 20% that weren't attending were the ones that arguably needed it the most. Like some of our more vulnerable students who, not surprisingly, struggled the most with the transition when school started back up were the ones who were not getting that 3-day experience. So I've been working with Adina Schechter, and I've been working with Colin McMurray, who's a 5th grade teacher at Glover, our 6th grade team, with our site council, with our DEIB committee, and we are poised to very soon make an announcement about a significant shift in what the orientation and transition structures are going to look like. The sneak preview is that we will no longer do the summer camps. We will no longer charge a fee, and we will no longer have a significant and important subset of our kids not be able to participate. So we are looking at a 2-day experience that would happen during the school day, starting with a 2-day experience that would happen during the school day in June. We would do it during the days when our 8th graders are in Washington, D.C. for their class trip. So we've got a third of our students will be out of the building, leveraging a lot of all the good things that have come from Welcome to Middle School, but embedding it, being led by the 6th grade teachers in 6th grade classrooms, and doing it over a 2-day experience. So There's a lot of momentum there, and I'll be honest with you, I was hesitant. I wasn't hesitant. I was curious to see how this shift would be received, right? From families who maybe their older children have participated in the camp, and it's natural to feel like maybe their younger kids are missing out on something. To the teachers who work the camp over the summer, and it's a lost opportunity for income. To the people who had been previously instrumental in just creating it and feeling like something was being taken away from them. But every stakeholder group, from our site council, our DEIB committee, our 6th grade team, has been unanimously enthusiastic about this shift, which, in working in schools for a long time, I can say that that's not usually the case when you're making a change. So I think it speaks a lot to the community thinking about all students and what they all need, and recognizing the importance of this transition. Like, this transition from elementary school to middle school is one that is almost entirely social emotional, right? The transition from 8th to 9th grade is almost entirely academic, right? And the two can't be looked at the same. So there's, we're gonna, I will begin to start messaging this with 5th grade families, so that hopefully to get them excited and to be clear about what they can expect. But the future of this is really exciting, and I have all the faith that it's going to be highly successful because of the buy-in that we're seeing from all our stakeholder groups. Some additional work that has continued to be in place to facilitate the transition. Most of the work so far has been on what I just described to you, but we do see opportunities and interest from our 5th grade teams and our 6th grade teams to increase collaboration between that vertical articulation, both around curriculum but also around 5th grade classrooms are organized differently than 6th grade classrooms, and vice versa. And I don't know whether there's clarity there for both of those teams, and it doesn't mean that one's doing it better than the other. It just means it's different. So having just increasing understanding and from both ways, I think, will also help, most importantly, the students in facilitating that transition from elementary school to middle school. And then there's also opportunities to increase coherence between the elementary and middle school special education teams to ensure that students, when a family has a transition meeting, and to discuss their child's IEP, that we're crosswalking what does one program at Glover look like, and how does it transition at Pierce, or how does another program at Tucker, what does that experience look like for a student when they're in 6th grade? So that work is, Danielle has been an incredible partner in that. There's a lot that we've had to honestly unwind from past experiences and past history, but I think that the right people are in the right seats to continue to move this forward. And finally, just a note about facilities, operations, and finance. We know from our schools, we know what our limitations are in terms of space. We know what our challenges are. We will continue to be engaged in the school building project as it takes on its next iteration. But we need to continue to address needs in the interim. We were very fortunate to onboard a four-teacher team this year. In doing that, we've reconfigured the layout of the building. We've tapped into, I think, as many creative solutions to get 1,000 students in a building that was not made for that many, and do it in a way that their day is organized and smooth and safe. But we're running out of options there, and I don't think we're going to see much of a dip in enrollment anytime soon, even with the hopefully school building project moving forward. In terms of finance, budget, and staffing, I know that the FY26 requests are not going to be able to be funded. That was 2.0 FTEs for exploratory teaching positions. So our STEM, art, music, drama classes are going to continue to run 28, 29, 30 students. That's a challenge. That's where we are right now. And you saw from the profile that the numbers are going to be about the same. That's hard. It puts a strain on those classes. It puts a strain on educators. But that's something that we cannot let fall off our list of needs. And the other two FTEs for instructional assistants, where students who, especially sixth grade students who had been receiving a lot of services in science and social studies as part of being a collaborative classroom, those are lost when they come to us, right? So there are definitely, there are things that are being lost by those budget requests not being funded, and just urge all of us to continue to advocate for those in subsequent years moving forward. But just to wrap up, to close, there's a lot to celebrate, a lot to be proud of, but we need to, even with all of that, we need to continue to ensure that we're moving forward in the spirit of continuous improvement. And to that end, some identified opportunities for improvement that we can expect to be part of our work going forward, as it's already part of our school improvement plan, is maintaining that laser focus on academic excellence and raising the bar for all students. That is our work. That is our charge. That is what we are a school. We are about teaching and learning. And we have spent, we're coming out on the right side of it, but we had spent several pandemic-ridden years just trying to get by, and then a few more trying to address to deal with addressing unfinished learning. But we need to keep that focus on raising the bar for all students, raising our expectations for all of our students, which are characterized by rigorous experiences throughout all grades and all disciplines. The school culture work and the culture and the belonging work has been, I think, one that we've seen our staff continue to grow in their buy-in for, and they're seeing the gains in their classrooms, right? They're seeing how when the culture changes, how that affects classroom climate, and you're never done. We've made a lot of gains that Pierce feels different now than it did 5 or 6 years ago, I can tell you that. But just because we've made a lot of progress doesn't mean we're done. And I think that's always going to be, that always has to be my message to our staff, my message to our community, that our kids are coming and they're getting an incredible experience, but we have to continue to push it and make sure that all students are having that access to that incredible experience. So I thank you for your interest. I appreciate the head nods, and I suspect we'll probably have, Matt, Janice, and I will probably have some thoughtful questions to field.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And yeah, what questions or comments do members have?
Well, my son just experienced the 6th grade transition this year, and he's loving it. And the camp have made a huge difference in his life, so he's been transitioned very well into 6th grade. And thank you so much for all the hard work that you guys are doing at the Pierce Middle School. The seminar class is such a useful thing to teach the kids how to be more organized and all those study habits, but also building a close community within the groups. So I hope that it can be extended into other grades, but I have asked that question before, and I already got the answer last year. So but I just want to praise how awesome jobs that you guys did at the Pierce Middle School. I have a suggestion. I have a question and a suggestion. My question would be, do the staff who teaches the same subject get time to collaborate with each other bi-weekly or weekly? Like within the schedule.
Do you want to talk about the scheduling part of it?
Sure, how the scheduling works. So we have a number of meetings. So our by department, the student, they meet once a cycle, right? So like all the 8th grade math teachers, the 7th grade math teachers, and our exploratory teachers, we do that with them as well. And then we also meet as a grade level once every other for in the 8th grade. In the 6th grade, I think they do it once a cycle, and then we also meet with the teams. So so in the 8th grade, me and Miss Veldrin, because she's the 8th grade counselor, we meet with each of the teams once every other cycle to talk about students. So there are actually a lot of opportunities for our teachers to meet, with their teams, with their grade levels, and with their departments.
That's great. Yeah.
Sorry, what's a cycle?
So we have a 7-day rotating cycle.
Yeah.
So that's
So once
7 days.
Once
Once every
7
7 days.
7 school days.
Yes,
Gotcha.
7 school days.
And each day has how many carriers?
So there are 6 periods in a day,
Yep.
and then we drop one of those 7 days, right? So it's a revolving cycle.
So I was thinking about the space issue, and now that we know the budget might not be fully funded for next year, so I was just thinking about creative solutions to this space issue. Maybe it's a stupid idea. Is it possible like we have departments for different subjects, and the teacher we use that will be in the department office, and then the classrooms and teachers. So the classrooms is available all the time, and as teachers they travel from classroom to classroom, and students also travel from classroom to classrooms.
We have, and Janice knows the numbers from Janice holds responsibility for being the master scheduler. But when we look at from 4 and 5 years ago to now, there used to be a handful of classrooms that were shared, and now there's
There's a handful that don't now.
Yeah, the majority. So
Yeah,
the
the
idea
majority
of
of
this
our
is my
classrooms are
classroom
shared.
is gone. But you're right, Bob, and that's where that has been a shift in professional culture too, right? It's easy to get comfortable in your own classroom or feel put out when I need to go into math's classroom and when it's his off period, and now he doesn't have the space to prep. I think the strengthening of the professional culture has made people more understanding and flexible, but it is most of the classrooms are utilized
Yeah, we're pretty
Every
tapped.
period.
every period.
Yeah.
I have several comments that I'm trying to I'm formulating. So if it's okay to speak in draft, I'm going to speak in draft. But just, I think listening to the presentation, I could pick up on sort of the progress that you've made from last year to this year. And when I think about sort of the introduction of this piece around values and how you were starting to ensure that you were living those values, right, in every aspect. So I was heartened to hear sort of the progress that you continue to make around that. I'm a firm believer that, you know, when you start living those values, the culture shift happens. Like, you have to be intentional about shifting culture and not just sort of take it for granted that it will magically somehow happen if your intention is there. You actually have to put actions behind it, and definitely heard throughout your presentation that you're doing that. And also sort of love to see I love seeing the alignment between the implementation plan and your strategic, you know, school improvement plan. I think that makes a lot of sense, and could see sort of where you're going. I had been hearing sort of over the course of our conversations with Dr. Burrows in terms of moving to this effort to make sure that that percentage of the sixth graders who were not getting that the support that they need to transition as well as they can into what can be a huge change developmentally, sort of where young people are at that particular stage. And I have a fifth grader that's getting ready and super excited, and I think I want the camp for me, not for her. But, you know, as she's talking about it, it's like I feel like I have to shift, right, in the way I'm thinking about her developmentally and where she's at. But it's such a big change for kids, and I think sometimes we take it for granted, but knowing that there is a subset of students that need it even more. And so how do you make it sure that it's accessible to all? And I am just so glad to see that shift, because I think it's going to continue to get us closer to where we want, where we see all of our students ready and able to make that transition. Challenges will always be there, but the more that we can do to make sure that we're supporting all of our students is great. So I'm just I was sitting here just super excited and going like, all right, I want to be part of the site council next year, and you know, sign me up now. And I'm very excited to see that transition. And I have heard so much from the community on how, I think to your point that you made, that Pierce feels different. And I think that speaks volumes to your leadership and definitely the team and the culture that you're fostering for the adults. Lastly, I would say that your use of data, I was very, again, I think that the way that you spoke about it in terms of not only focusing on, okay, what students need additional support, but also how can then we use data to inform practice and shift practice and do it in a way that feels safe for teachers, right? It doesn't feel like you're singling folks out, but this is an opportunity to continue to improve your craft. And I think that's a great shift there, and glad that folks are taking advantage of it and doing it.
Yeah, Brian and Kat deserve a lot of credit for that too. I mean, it's been a team effort, but they are awesome thought partners and leaders as curriculum leaders and leaders in our school too.
So I just have comments and just
Thank you.
feeling very positive about the shifts that you're making. So thank you.
Thanks, Leah.
Let me just add one more question. Like, how many days are the 8th graders going to be in DC? And so, is it 2 days?
3 days.
3 days.
3 days.
Are the 5th graders going to be in Pierce for all 3 days?
2 days. We got the blessing from the 4 elementary principals this week that I think that there was some massaging they had to do with their 5th grade team. So it's the last full week of school.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I understand for 5th grade teachers, that's that last full week with your students before you send them on. I know that I think it's Collicott and Glover maybe have their moving on ceremony scheduled for that Friday, and we don't want to step on the toes of that. So the day would look like 9:45-ish till about 2. So they'd have 2 days. They'd work through like a mock schedule. They would change a few classes. We would have lunch there. It would be led by our 6th grade teachers in 6th grade classrooms. So a lot of the details and the design are still being fleshed out, but the structure has come together.
Great.
I would just like to piggyback on your comments, Dr. Miranda, which were very articulate, not drafty at all, in my opinion. Just to reinforce the same appreciation. I think, this is my 4th year on school committee, and I also, have a rising 6th grader. I first ran for school committee when she was in 1st grade, and quite honestly, one of my main motivations to even run for school committee at all was my concerns about Pierce and wanting to do anything I could to sort of help our district move in a positive direction so that I would feel confident to send my own children to Pierce Middle School when that time came. And so it is a good feeling to sit here conscious of the trajectory of these past several years, and also to hear you continuing to really talk candidly about the work you're still doing towards clear and focused goals of building on the progress you've been making. And so I'm also just excited, honestly, because this to me does feel like a very tangible sort of story of like the positive momentum that we have as a district. And as you said, it's not perfect. There are definitely still challenges. And at the same time, like, I am proud that I do intend to send my daughter to Pierce next year, and I'm actually really excited about it. And she is really excited about it, and we feel like ready for this transition as a family. And I think that's a lot credit to your leadership, Dr. Fish, but also the strong team that you have built in these past years, and to all the work your teachers have been doing. So thank you. And yeah, we'll be seeing more of each other.
Yeah. Just a couple of questions. So I am feeling super old because I do not have anybody going into middle school. They are all heading out of high school. So it's a very different experience. But it does make me think about that piece where you were saying, it's a very, the Welcome to Middle School, that program, and you were talking about like it's a really social emotional change from there versus academic to high school. I would maybe say I think it's more emotional as well to high school. And so I don't know if this would be, if the high school has a program or if you guys do anything around that transition. I think if you think about the ages for kids in high school, a 14-year-old is very different than a 17-year-old, and the things that they have to deal with in high school. So I think you add a layer, right? You have that social emotional piece, and then you're adding in, there's a more academic rigor, there's more consequences, good and bad, about, you know, if you're not doing well academically. So I just don't know if there's the opportunity at Pierce to have something similar or work with the high school for some sort of similar transition support. I think the executive function skills, the need for those go up exponentially. You know, if you haven't figured out how to organize your work, you know, you definitely need to by 9th grade. So I just would suggest that if there's a way to implement something or do something with the high school, I think that would be really helpful. I know I've seen my own kids struggle with that transition. I also had a question, and the growth was like 46 students in one school year, which was, you went from like 900, but yeah, 964 to 1,006. And you know, one of the things, and this is maybe just more anecdotal, but I'd be curious about it. Anecdotally, you begin to hear that a lot more people are not making the transition to the private schools. I think, you know, hear from friends in schools that, you know, for example, BC High, there aren't as many kids going there. So have you guys seen that? And if so, I think it plays into some of what you guys are talking about, which is this, there's been a substantive change. People are eager to keep their kids in the district. Have you heard that? And then do you see that impacting your enrollment?
Yes, I think so. I think we're starting to see that.
Yeah.
For me, in my first 4 years in the district, they were the pandemic-ridden years, and we were seeing an exodus after 6th grade for schools that first year schools that were open 5 days a week, or who had in-person instruction, and so it was hard for me to get a measure of like, the rate of how was that rate of attrition going to be something that was it a blip in the radar, or is it a sign of things to come? But when you look at, for example, our current 7th grade, that's usually the year when you see it, they're 341 is the current enrollment. They were 352 as 6th graders. So to only lose 11 students out of 352 would suggest, again, it's a one data point, but we are seeing, and even our school counselors do a great job of tracking just the number of applications. They're the gatekeeper of all the transcripts and discipline records and attendance and things like that. They keep track of how many applications they're helping to quarterback the process for, and they're seeing a downturn in the year over year, which is awesome. That there's this surge of enthusiasm about not going for a private option. I mean, I would argue, I'll just say it, fine, it may be unpopular. I don't think many of the private options are better than they're going to get from their public school experience, but those are family choices, and that's, you know, parents know their kids best. But I don't think there's people who are feeling like they need to leave the district because of something that's fundamentally missing or wrong.
That's great.
I would actually piggyback on what you said, Amanda. I do think, I love that you're, creating a better transition between 5th and 6th. I think that's, I feel like 5th graders, they're babies still, and then come to middle school and it's a whole new world and they're learning a lot of things. And I have to say that I've gotten great feedback from parents of current 6th graders that really is helping. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the efforts that are being made there. This is my 3rd year at Pierce, so I have seen in the last 3 years huge change, leaps and bounds. I love seeing my 7th grader sit at the kitchen table and read every night, which is phenomenal. That didn't happen a couple of years ago, so I really, really appreciate the work that the teachers are doing, and the focus on academics, and the focus on, and all the things that you're doing in terms of, how you're kind of bringing it together and aligning with the implementation plan and the goals of the district. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate the anti-bias lessons. I think those are, just being proactive about those things, because things come up all the time. I was curious, you being proactive, are you seeing less and less of those kind of incidents as a result of being proactive?
I'm gonna knock on wood right now. We're seeing less of some of the incidents we had dealt with previously 3 and 4 years ago were significant in terms of the type of language and the behaviors that were there. I mean, we have not been seeing that. Working with the population of students that we do, and the impulsivity that can sometimes overtake the rational thought. We still see plenty of choices of words and comments intended to be jokes, right? That we still see. But what having the respond to bias lessons has done is when Matt, Janice, and I all have the same practice. When one of us is intervening with an unexpected situation like that, where a student's using hurtful, hateful language, we're able to, when we work with them, the old model was like, you have detention, like there was a punitive approach. We take that more restorative approach to them, where we can still keep them after school or keep them during lunch, but then we'll revisit the lesson that we did with them on microaggressions, or we all use a lesson, a reflection activity on hate speech. And just putting the punishment is the punishment. Like, if you go at things just with a punitive approach, you're less likely to get the desired outcome of extinguishing the behavior. You're more likely to get a response where the student's going to learn, rethink, and that has probably been the most noticeable shift. And what's been interesting is we get kind of mixed results when we talk with parents about this too. Sometimes there's parents who are very supportive of, like, this is not how our family talks, and we appreciate that they're gonna have another opportunity to learn. And sometimes we get like, they're, kids being kids, and when we get those responses, that's where it reminds us that why this work is so important, because there's messaging that kids are getting from everywhere that we have, whether it's a responsibility or an opportunity to interrupt that's where our work lies. So,
And I have to say, I think that is very effective. I think having both of those, where there's consequences for your actions, but then having those conversations and getting them to understand is so valuable, and I've seen that, and I think it's just very positive. So I'm glad that despite the mixed feedback that you get, that you're being consistent about how you're approaching that. So
we also we'd rather you make a mistake in 7th grade than in 10th grade, right? The stakes, right, or beyond, right? Yeah. Where there's more opportunity to learn when you're 12, and have an opportunity to come back from it too.
I think one of the biggest differences I've seen too, particularly I work closely with the 8th grade, is students' response to those conversations. I find that students are much quicker to own the mistakes that they have made and recognize that it was a mistake, and willing to make amends for, the impact that their behavior has caused. And I think that those lessons that we've done have really kind of helped students with that. I think that's one of the hardest things for middle school kids, is to own their mistakes and to recognize when they make them. But I see a lot more of that now, which is great.
And to continue that a little bit too, I'm sorry to cut you off, Anna. A lot of our students now are even more willing to speak to the students that they have harmed, which for a middle school brain to be able to communicate that is really hard. But to have those conversations and anti-bias lessons in the past couple of years, giving them the tools that they need to counter that harm and express how that made them feel in that moment, and to own it, is really important too.
I think that, absolutely. And I mean, being a mom to middle schoolers, I know how difficult that is. So I appreciate all your efforts and your consistency. I know, the transition from 8th to 9th has been kind of, gotten a lot of feedback. The last couple of years, are students ready for 9th grade and the rigor that comes with it? Obviously the emotional aspect, but also the academic, right? I know there have been lots of articles lately about leveling and de-leveling and all of those things that have come up in the last several months. And I was curious if there is any, I appreciate that you're tailoring the academics I do have concerns in oversubscribed classes that students are getting the attention that they need because we don't have the staff resources. That we are still able to meet those needs and push the students that need to be pushed and offer the students that need support the additional support, you know. So I know funding is always a challenge, but I wanted to kind of get your take on what the realities of that are. I mean, I know everything is done with really great intentions, but what is the reality of that and what are the shortcomings? You know, I was curious to understand from you about those, and then also maybe, you know, understanding, I know when the high school principal came in and she talked about having a lot of leveling in the classes and how important that was, and maybe not like just at the, like, you know, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, maybe not, you know, just maturity-wise or age-wise, they might not be able to handle that kind of, but I wanted to see like if there was a better transition from 8 to 9 so that they are prepared to take on the workload. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the leveling was that was one of the first things that I encountered when I started at Pierce, and I heard from a lot of our staff of a desire to move away from the practice of leveling. That it didn't work, that it was more segregation than it was differentiation. It was taking the kids with the highest MCAS scores and putting them in one room. And that ultimately the same curriculum was being delivered because I do believe, as a former high school principal, I believe that high school offerings should be open enrollment. There should be no prerequisites. There should be, I think that our high school does a really good job with giving students the opportunity to move in and out of levels. I also think that high school students developmentally are more ready to navigate in and out, and I think that, you know, as a parent of 2 high schoolers who are here now who are having great experiences, like there's choices you make as a family too. Am I going to take 4 honors classes, or am I going to try an AP class in my sophomore year or whatever that might be? But to go back to, we went, our site council quarterbacked almost a year-long review of the leveling practices that were happening at Pierce. This was during the 2020-2021 school year. And we looked at multiple data sources, MCAS data, teacher focus groups with some qualitative data, and a review of current literature on practices around leveling, heterogeneous and homogeneous mixing, in all 3 of those. And there is a 70 slide PowerPoint that was presented at this table that exists, but at that time, all 3 of those data sources pointed toward the removal of leveling. That was not beneficial for kids, and there has not been a teacher in our building who has said we need to bring it back. And I'm not trying to be dismissive of, because I read the same articles that you're referring to, but I think in practice, the curriculum that we have between the illustrative math and the Amplified is rigorous enough and flexible enough to meet the needs of a wide swath of learners in a heterogeneous classroom. I think Brian Seelig would say the same thing about math and about Kataroshi, about ELA. Does it mean that we should just say we're not going to go back and everything we're doing is fine? No. I mean, that's where that focus on continuous improvement has to happen, and being able to continue to equip teachers with more professional learning opportunities about differentiation within those classrooms and small group instruction, and like there's a lot of that there, but I will at least once a year get a call from another local middle school principal, and they're typically from their principals in districts, high-performing districts similar to ours, and maybe even more so, that said, hey, we heard you got rid of leveling. And I said, yep, and I sent them the slides. And they're like, no, I know all the data. Like, they said, how did you get it through your community? Because that has tended to be the barrier, because it feels like something's being taken away. But when I have come to, and again, as a former high school principal, like I had different feelings, I think, when I saw students coming in, and a lot of them, I think, would stand up, like, probably in the same vein that you're asking the question of, like, are these kids ready? Are they? And the answer is most of them are, yes. And I think the damage that leveling and tracking does for lots of kids outweighs any benefit to the alternative. That's my personal belief, and that came a lot out of that year-long study that we did. So if there are practices or there are ideas that are better than what we're doing that look different, like it, I don't think we feel like we need to be right, but at the same time, it was convincing what came out of that study from 4 years ago.
When you talk about small group instruction, like with larger classes, is that still possible? Or is a teacher stretched too thin to be able to provide that? Like that was kind of...
No, it is still possible. And I think our class sizes in our core content classes, so math, English, science, and social studies, they're still manageable. They're still, average class size in 6th grade is like 18, 19 now. It's 22-ish in 7th and 8th grade. So those are not astronomical because we've prioritized our resources in those content areas. It's the art class with 32. It's the STEM class with 29. That's
with
where
35.
And the hard part is for a lot of our students, that is, for many of them, they pick that class. Like that's the best part of their day. In terms of like choice. And now they're in there and they're one of 32. That's where that I think it would be impossible to really differentiate a STEM lesson for that range. But in a class of, if you walked into a 6th grade math class, you would likely see a table in the back of the room, not very different than a 5th grade class, where there's small group instruction happening in the back, there's a majority of students working on one thing, and then there might be the student or students who are ready for more who are doing that. So I'm not, I could probably tell from the comments what my thinking is, but I'm not convinced that we need to shift the pendulum too far, but at the same time, if schools are doing have other practices or other initiatives or other more different creative ways than what we're doing, then we have a responsibility to understand more about that.
But I think you guys are doing that to a level where every year, this is my 3rd year seeing your site council presentation, and you've evolved the way you're doing that and, increasing rigor in a way that makes sense for you, right? Like in your school environment. So I think you are evolving and you are making changes constantly, and those are the improvements that we're seeing. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate you mentioning that.
And I have to say that chorus class, my daughters, they were so excited about chorus and all their friends, and it's a very big class, but they do a really good job.
Dawn's amazing. She's the only one who could handle that, but she's amazing with those
Runs
kids.
a tight ship.
She's like, bring them on. I'll take more. She's awesome.
I always look forward to seeing them sing in the tower lobby because it's like a chorus of angels. You walk with the whole way, you just hear echo throughout the whole building. It's pretty powerful. It was a great job.
I'll wrap up and I'll try and be quick because I know we've held you all for a long time. I, again, appreciate all you're talking about, and I appreciate all the comments on and the focus on culture. Again, I agree with many of the points made of just how that is foundational, right, in terms of improvement across all kinds of subjects as kids are known and challenged and feel connected and held to high expectations. That's fantastic. So I really appreciate that. Appreciate hitting on the enrollment challenge fully. I feel your pain. Again, first time the building's ever been over 1,000 kids. About 15% bigger than it was. Over 140 kids more than kind of was when it was first built. Those are real impacts to your spaces and how you're dealing with that. So totally understand that and appreciate you raising it. And again, all the more reason we need to move with urgency within the MSBA process. I think as I'm I've looked at your MCAS, ELA, kind of just data things. I want to acknowledge, I think your ELA scores seem to be really strong and actually comparable to where we were back pre-pandemic, which is really impressive. I think they took a slight dip from last year as the entire state did, but not nearly what the state did, essentially level. And again, really, really impressive in terms of kind of what what we're doing, especially achievement percentile ranks, like high 80% compared to kind of other districts across the state, which again means like you're in the top 10%. And so that's really, really good, obviously. I had some questions on just math in terms of that looking like a little bit lower than ELA, and wondering if that was a focus of y'all's, or if there's any particular like thing y'all are looking at as it relates to kind of the math instruction within Pierce, or I think we did a new math curriculum a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so
Desmos
I think are we in year 3 of it, and so it's still fairly new? But
it's still
anyways,
fairly new,
wondering,
but not new enough that we should be saying that it's
Yeah.
the newness.
Yeah, okay.
I think that the curriculum, to my response to Anna's question before, we believe that the curriculum stands up on its own and is strong to meet a range of learners in a heterogeneous classroom. But I do think that there is some work around the work that looking more closely at some of our instructional practices, and that when you're talking about the teacher level MCAS data analysis, there were some big it was hard for some people to look and see that their growth was less than, trended as being less than the rest of the grade. And that seemed to happen a little bit more frequently in math than it did in ELA. I mean, having said that, we have a 7th grade math teacher who's consistently has an SGP averaging like 71, 72. So the work here, I completely understand where the comment's coming from, and I think that the question's coming from is a matter of practice and a matter of leveraging the strengths and the practices of some of the people that already exist. And the curriculum has changed, and so too do the instructional practices. And I think that as a former math teacher, I'll admit that we have a tendency to maintain sort of a traditional approach to math instruction, even though our curriculum has evolved into a more contemporary approach. So I think bridging the gap between historical practices and newer curriculum, that is it is a point of emphasis for Brian and my work with our teachers.
Appreciate it. Thank you for all the work y'all are doing. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all so much for great discussion and all the work you're doing. And I think
So much for 15 minutes.
I think this. Look at that. Yeah,
I said these guys in the way, and I was going to go for brevity. I don't know, but I think I did all right. The discussion was worth it.
But sincerely appreciate the parent representatives who have stayed. I mean, I think there's a chance I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this was our final site council presentation for this year.
Okay.
And so we do end up spending like a lot of time in our meetings that are fortunate to have site council presentations, but that's for an important purpose, which is our opportunity to stay in touch with what is actually happening day in, day out in our schools. And so thank you all for being with us this evening, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all your good work.
Thank you. Okay, so there's one more piece under your report, and then we'll move on, but I think, acknowledge to the group here, this next agenda item is the FY24 annual report, which, do you want to frame that, or I just want to apologize because it was emailed to us, but I didn't make sure that we had it in our folder as well. So hopefully people had the opportunity to review that when we were.
That's under your report. We're on the implementation plan report now.
Sorry. Sorry. Never mind. Implementation plan, sorry.
I can talk
We went a little out of order.
I will talk about that, though.
No, I apologize. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is our Q2 report. as we talked about in our governance meetings, and trying to bring a little bit more structure to how we share data and how we connect the data that we're reporting to actual work that we're doing, so that we are in a reflective cycle together. The district is with the school committee and looking at how are our students doing, what with the time that we have collectively as a teaching and learning community, how is our intentionality and all of the different initiatives that we have going impacting that data, and what are we learning and how are we kind of growing from where we are today. So we have, as you know, we've structured all of our work around our implementation plan this year. I've been giving you periodic updates on the work of our action teams, and that will be ongoing. Those updates also happen, for example, tomorrow we have a leadership meeting. Our curriculum leadership team meets tomorrow afternoon. That's all of our coordinators, directors, principals, central office, administrators, and we're doing a similar kind of thing where we're talking about how are we doing in all of our different action team work, assessing kind of where we are now and looking at targets to the end of the year. The school year is going by blisteringly fast right now. So tonight, in our first quarter, we have 4 quarters here. In our first quarter, we talked about our priority area 2, climate, culture, and well-being, and we had a presentation on that, looking at some data, YRBS data and other data. Tonight, we're focusing on the most important area of our work, which Danielle is leading, which is our MTSS multi-tier systems of support. This is in our implementation plan. This is 1.2. And as I've mentioned before, I think our staff resoundingly saw this as a need for us to move away from being siloed at either a grade level or building level to really have a system that works at the district level. And really you can't, it's nearly impossible to do this work at the building level. It really does have to be coordinated because there's so many shared services across the district that directly impact student support related to MTSS. So Danielle Wetmore, who is our Director of Student Services, is here to share a little bit about the work that she's leading with the group, looking at some data as well, and kind of bringing us on a journey of where we are right now and where we're headed.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. How are you? First, I want to thank Regina and V for their help with gathering the data and the materials with me on this journey tonight. And I will make it efficient so that I can make sure I have time for questions. I'm going to talk about academic excellence, specific in the area of our action team 1.2, which is multi-tiered systems of support. So I'll talk a little bit about the middle of the year data that we've collected as it relates to special education, seeing our increase in numbers for special education 504 plans and our multilingual learners, and just sort of how that ties to multi-tiered systems of supports. So that's what we'll talk about today. So I just wanted to give a snapshot of our iReady and DIBELS data for our 1 to 5, our students in grades 1 through 5. The window for completing the iReady and DIBELS closed today for the middle of the year, so there may be some scores that aren't reflective in this, but generally this seems about accurate, and most students were finished late last week. We just had a couple of students who needed to finish this week. So the data that we have for our iReady and math is our students with disabilities over the last 3 years, so since we've been doing the iReady data for math. As you can see, some of the scores have changed a little bit, so we do have a reduction in students who were 3+ grades below. That has narrowed a little bit, and we've increased in 1 grade below. I work with Brian and Kat pretty frequently to make sure that we're looking at this data, figuring out what curriculum and supports our special educators need to really align the curriculum and help students make progress so that when they're taking these assessments, we have a reflection of where they're currently sitting. This is also an aggregate assessment from grades 1 through 5, so it's not disaggregated by level, so this is all grade levels. So our non-readers to our readers, our students who aren't fluent in, for example, math facts to all the way to through 5th grade. So if you go to the next slide. This is the middle of the year iReady data for our non-special education students. As you can see, that is pretty status quo year to year. And then for our students in reading, similarly, that has not changed dramatically from the 2 years that we've been collecting this data for students with disabilities and students who do not have disabilities. So if you see here that it's approximately the same between 2023 and 2024's middle of the year assessments. It is important to note that on all of these assessments, the middle of the year, students shouldn't be proficient at their grade level. So most of our students should be in about the yellow zone. So that is, I think, an important notation for middle of the year. I think the end of the year benchmarks really reflect better how large the gap is between our students with disabilities and our students without. Next slide, please. So one of the things I thought was really important to bring to this team tonight is around our increase and our trending increase in students qualifying for special education in Milton Public Schools. So we've had a large number of students initially evaluated. That has risen, but if you can see here, we have had about 14% of our students in 2020 who were students with disabilities, and currently we have about 18.6% of our students who have disabilities. So this is just students who require specially designed instruction to be able to make progress. So our students with 504s, I'll show you in a couple of slides. This trend, I think, partially could be from COVID and missing these students who have challenges learning virtually for a year. It's also, I think, a lot of our 3rd graders have been making slower progress and struggling a little bit more because they didn't have that access to socialization in 2020 in the same way that other students who were in 3rd and 4th grade did pre-COVID. Next slide, please. So this just also marks that in a different way. While we still continue to maintain a lower number of students with disabilities, if you notice that we've actually risen about 4.3% in our students with disabilities versus the state increase, which is 2.8%. So it's a significant difference in terms of our increase. Next slide. And similarly with our students who require who have substantially limited in one or more life activities. Their disability requires accommodations. That has also increased since 2020 pretty significantly. Many of our students are now, instead of, historically 504s are generally for medical needs. More often than not now we're seeing students with attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, and anxiety they may not require specially designed instruction, but they definitely need accommodations to help meet their needs, whether that's extra time on evaluations or tests, or coming to school a little bit later because it's really hard for them to get out of bed and they struggle there. So we've seen quite a drastic increase in our students who require 504s. And additionally, we have seen a pretty big increase in our students moving into town who are multilingual learners. So prior to 2021-22, we don't have the data for that, but it is my understanding through Dr. Pavlicek that we were probably at around 70, 75 students in 2019. So from 2019 to 2024, where we have close to 150 students and the same number of faculty and no EL coordinator or someone overseeing it, those students are getting the supports they need as best they can through the EL teachers. But in terms of the multi-tiered systems of support, this is going to be really beneficial for them to get the content area support that they need throughout the school year. So I thought those were important pieces to note as we start talking about MTSS. which is now. So we've really, I think as a leadership team, really want to prioritize building a strong multi-tiered systems of support, and I'll describe what that is as well. I do want to note that one of the sort of acronyms, response to intervention, I think that gets muffled with MTSS, and MTSS is a more global approach to learning, so it's not just academics. So responsive intervention is students who are already struggling, you're responding by intervening, whereas for multi-tiered systems of support, you're looking at academics, attendance, social emotional needs, behavioral, so your whole student approach. So that's the difference. Next slide. That describes that right here. So with MTSS, we want to address the needs of all students in the least restrictive environment, and align our entire system across the district together. We provide continuous improvement at all levels, so students are receiving the most intervention at the gen ed level, and our more significant needed students through a data process would require tier 2 or tier 3. Next slide. And I will talk a little bit about this. So this is our multi-tiered system of support. So again, at the tier 1 level, that's your general ed classroom level. That's where students receive strategies and differentiated instruction, our universal design approach to help support as many students as possible in that classroom environment. Through a data collection system, students who need more targeted intervention would go through, that's where they would go through our student support team process, be identified as someone who needs 6 to 8 weeks of intervention to see what's going on. If that's not working, then they would step up to tier 3, which is a more individualized approach to intervention prior to the special education process. So by creating this system, it sort of lowers the automaticity of saying, oh, this student isn't handling the general ed classroom, let's refer them for special education. This is just an example of the Department of Education's framework that we are using. So we use the Department of Education's blueprint to help drive some of our work with our MTSS team. So now for our action team members. Right now, we have about 15 people on our action team. Next slide. And I wanted to make sure to just acknowledge all of them. It is a multidisciplinary group, plenty of teachers at every level. We have related service providers. We purposely put our inclusion specialists who currently run our SST process, administrators, and principals, all part of our team. So it's also at every level. So we have elementary, middle, and high school folks on our team to help really build this system. This is our blueprint that we used and created last year through the implementation process. This is our first year. So our goal at the end of this year is really to develop that MTSS framework for all of our students pre-K to 12 to make sure that we're aligned both vertically, so across grade levels, and also horizontally. So every student across each grade level is getting the same intervention and support as needed. And it's not by school, or right now what we're finding is that different schools, as we do our sort of initial assessment, we're finding that different schools are providing different levels of intervention and support, and there are different requirements. So really aligning this is going to be probably the most vital tool that we have. So in terms of the work that we've done so far, our MTSS team, we reviewed on November 5th during our first PD day. We spent some time really reviewing what MTSS was to all of our faculty. We took some feedback from them around what their perspective of MTSS is, what we're doing well, what we're not doing well across the district. The Action Team 1.2 really analyzed it and really dove deep into what people were seeing as strengths and challenges, what we were missing. Additionally, what we did at our most recent meeting was that we looked at different MTSS frameworks across the country. So there are really some strong MTSS in like Fairfax, Virginia. Chicago has a really strong MTSS. Portland, Oregon has a really strong MTSS. So we really took a look at multiple different approaches to MTSS in different districts, different size districts across the country. So we're going to take all of that data. We took all of that data. We're now completing a self-assessment. So each of our team members is completing a self-assessment. At our next meeting, we'll look at each of those and come to consensus on where the district currently stands holistically, and then start building our framework out from there, using our strengths to drive some of our building of the framework. I think I have that next slide. That was the next slide. And then for more information on our special education profile, I just sent the link so that you all had it. It has some really useful data points that I wasn't going to bore everyone with tonight, but I just thought there was some interesting information on that website.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Questions for Daniel?
Sure. I got a couple. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate you coming. To jump back to the beginning, kind of the Dibbles and iReady, and again, might not be, I don't think it is a special education specific goal, so maybe it's more Regina and Peter, but you mentioned how the mid-year is obviously only halfway through, right? The end of the year is the one that we really focus on. But I assume we still have like a goal for mid-year, right? To say, hey, this is really what we're aiming for, this percentage of our kids to be proficient at mid-year, because that sets us up to have this percentage to be proficient at end of year. And we know that at least for iReady, the percent that are mid or above, like that is the percentage that's highly correlated with MCAS success. And so like that's a percent that's really important to kind of get as high as possible. So I guess my question there is, what is our mid-year, middle of the year kind of goal for both of those metrics as we are seeing those numbers? Because I think for me it's a little hard to say like, yeah, what, we're at 47, 30%, whatever it is, like what, is that on pace, or are we off pace a little bit? Like what's our...
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Do you have a number that I can get back to you with Kat and Brian around what their numbers are. I don't know if you've...
Kat DeRoche and Brian are planning to present in the end of February in great detail all of that information. I do think here at the school committee. Yeah. We've talked about this is the preview of it, and I think they can probably answer that more clearly and specifically than Danielle or I could. But I do think there is a discrepancy, obviously, between the students with identified needs, and it's something they're working on. And as Danielle said, they are trying to make different teaching programs and strategies available to the students. Yeah. So we are going to spend some of our time on March 4th, coming up in the afternoon, working on grade level teams, talking and digging into that data too with students.
And I think traditionally, yeah, and I think you're probably talking about all students, or are you thinking specific to students with disabilities, or just a general question of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I mean, I think knowing, what it is for all students, but then also for your, like, what, we only have 2 years of data, obviously, on data, so like what the historical performance is and like what we're trying to achieve, I guess is somewhat hard to identify. But yeah, just any goals as we look to like dissect the data ourselves and see it, to say like, hey, is there, are these things we should be celebrating? Are there places of concern that we should, think about additional resources for?
I think what this is glaring for me in terms of the special education data specifically is around the need for more focused curriculum for our students who have our pull-out services, so that they require that smaller group setting in order, historically, and something I've been working with Pierce, but other buildings as well, as what kind of curriculum do those students need, and how do we either supplement what we have, or do we need something fresh and new for our students who are significantly behind? So our foundations program for our students who are cognitively below average, that they may not be able to currently reach grade level material. So how are we supplementing that in order for them to access what they need? Sorry, I hit my goal. Thank you. So I think that became glaring for Kat, Brian, and I, so that's why we started putting together at least monthly meetings to try to figure out what kind of supports do we need, how are we building these programs, what do they need from this core content area, specifically math and reading, because that's where a lot of our goals are focused, because teachers hadn't traditionally had that material and have had to sort of make stuff up and go on websites to find what they need. So we've really made a concerted effort. So I think that's what the data is telling us now. And hopefully we'll be able to start to see as we build that curriculum for these teachers. And even in the general education setting, how does a teacher, a general education teacher, supplement material as needed? How do they work in collaboration with the special education liaison to modify curriculum in the moment or have readily available? That to me is what I see out of this data, is that they need more support.
Just two others, and they're somewhat related in that I see our ELL numbers, and they're 450% higher than we were many years ago because our numbers used to be so small. So they are high. I had a question around our FLEP rate. Like, do you know what our current FLEP rate is, and like what it has historically been, and like just because that's something that has shown itself post-pandemic is kind of simple. There are fewer students rolling off of that and moving out of ELL services, and I don't know how that exists within our circumstance, but obviously, again, that compounds year over year in terms of more students to serve. And obviously, the goal of any of these services is to provide kids what they need in order to get them back down, from my perspective at least, to like general education settings, and especially our English language learners, get them back into English speaking classrooms or main core content classrooms as quickly as possible to engage in that.
Yeah, I can find that information for you. I'm not sure what data was collected prior to my arrival here, and I sort of took on multilingual learners after our assistant superintendent last year left, so I'm not sure what data he had, but I can certainly, our EL teachers are phenomenal and they collect their own data, so I can certainly reach out to them and see what they've collected over the years, and they've all been here for quite a bit of time. But they are overloaded, and they manage to make sure they see all of their students, and it's pretty impressive to meet with them monthly.
Great. I guess a similar question just for SPED is like, do you have a sense of what percentage of our special ed students or number of our special ed students kind of, maybe only within the last year, but on like an annual basis, like roll off of IEP services and kind of back into?
It's a pretty small number. I would say less than 5%. Our middle school actually has the highest rate out of all the elementary, middle, or high school. They start to see pretty great growth between 6th and 7th grade. So really we focus on what does it look like in terms of reduction of services as they go. How do they remediate their skills? But it's a pretty low number overall. I think with MTSS, you'll see, as we start to build that framework, you'll start to see, one, the goal is to see less students referred for special education because they are getting what they need in that less restrictive environment. Yeah. And then hopefully you'll start to see students come off of them because teachers will be trained and they'll understand, and not that they don't now, our teachers are wonderful, but I think, having to think about differentiating for all students without a ton of professional development around it and really honing in on the simplicity of some of the little tools or things that you can do. It's an overwhelming thought, planning curriculum all day, and then how do I build in social emotional supports? How do I build in, behavior intervention strategies? It's a lot to take on. So I think structuring it in a way that is going to be easy for teachers, I think, is going to be a great driver and motivation.
Teaching is
and onboarding.
Incredibly hard. But yeah, I think the more we can provide the supports within the classroom setting by the teacher through the Tier 1 and Tier 2 interventions, obviously reduces the caseload for special ed, and again, provides kids kind of learning within their peer, amongst their peers within kind of work content classrooms. which I
And
think is the goal.
there's a ton of research too around self-esteem drivers, and by not feeling isolated or singled out. It's called academic self-esteem. So there's a whole there's a lot of research on that that's coming out in terms of how do you evaluating students, and that how that is makes them feel being pulled out of class to get tested, and just overall self-esteem being pulled into separate spaces throughout the day. And so by putting this framework together, that may alleviate some of that stress. Thus, kids might like school later in middle and high school. So.
Thank you.
I also have a question. Does this data reflect both students who need special help in the English pathway and the French immersion programs? And what is the difference between these two tracks that we have in terms of number of students who request special attentions, and how do we provide them similarly or differently between these two tracks?
So they're provided as students need them, so they're individualized. So regardless if they're on the French immersion track or the English innovation track, if they require intervention or evaluation, they receive it. One of the things that we're working on, and Kat and I actually talked about it today, was how do we help identify students, because I think one of the biggest challenges that have been ongoing that we found is our French immersion students who are then diagnosed with dyslexia, and they've missed 2+ years of opportunity to learn English-based phonics, or English-based rules-based reading. And so we were talking today about early indicators, and something we're building into our kindergarten screening this year is it's called the Shaywitz dyslexia screening, and it's for kindergarten aged. And by building that in kindergarten and then having that data point, and then potentially offering that before first grade for students who were flagged or are flagged through our DIBELS, we may be able to have that early indicator to then determine what's the next step. If the student, if the family would like the student to go through French, what does that look like in terms of services that student might need? Because, a student is dyslexic in any language. So is it French and English services? I think we're just sort of playing around with what that would look like for some students with that need, so that we're not waiting until 3rd grade before identifying those students, which makes them already 2 years behind grade level, and now you're starting, at point 1 for them in English.
One thing about the mid-year data, and one of the reasons why we chose the mid-year data, is exactly what you were asking also, is that the state does not require that we do it at mid-year, but we do it with our English students and not our French immersion students. So we do French immersion, or we do all students, the English and the French immersion students, in the fall and the spring. The mid-year data is only for our English students. So that's one of the reasons we actually looked at that too, because it pulls that out. Because it's obvious on the DIBELS, which is English language arts, it's predominantly phonics based. It impacts students' scores if they're immersed in French in kindergarten, 1st grade and 2nd grade. They're not scoring as well. But we do find by 3rd grade, they really pick up again. So as long as they're learning a phonemic system. The iReady is all 3 times in all groups. So the iReady's math, the DIBELS is ELA.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if you remind me again, sort of if you look at slide 19, which is the implementation plan for the multi-tiered system of support. In terms of the outcome column, we are hoping to have all of those accomplished by the close of the school year? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Just I was trying to remind
We're an
myself of that
optimistic
timeline.
group.
Which for us, for us is August.
Right. So I shouldn't expect a report, to be ready.
I do have to say, the team is absolutely wonderful, and there's really great input and valuable. We make our meeting times really valuable, and I think they're super motivated to get this off the ground too, because I think this is a huge missing piece to teaching and learning in the district. And will help drive a lot of our curriculum decision-making and our data point decision-making. And do we need additional tools to help identify data for students with disabilities? Like, all of that will help by having a strong framework that goes, again, both horizontally and vertically across the district.
Great, thank you. And I think the other thing that I would just echo is Mark's comment earlier around when we're looking at the data, sort of thinking of what our targets are. So it's looking at the data, but in context of what those targets might be, so we can assess, how are we doing? And if we haven't set those yet, that we should consider sort of setting some of those, so that reviewing the data from a school committee level, we can sort of look at it from that perspective of how much, how on track are we?
Completely agree, and I think we will rely on the expertise of Kat and Brian on that.
Yeah,
It's
for
super
sure.
important.
I mean, I would say, like, relative to that, the grade level is, and which is the metric on a number of these slides, is what we are generally focused on. So in terms of an outcome measure, and what we're focused on is kind of like every student is at grade level. So when you walk into a data conversation, they tend to be talking about grade level. So I think that is our kind of current practice in terms of, assessing kind of like how many students, especially with looking at MTSS and providing supports potentially at Tier 2 and Tier 3 to bring students up to grade level who have fallen behind. The percentage of students meeting, at grade level at the end of the year, which is what the expectation is the focus. I think one of the things we're working on relative to our yearly report is what kind of, kind of like percentages, or we're currently right here, we want this many, 10% more students at grade level next year. Like, those are the kinds of things that I think once we have a system established, then we can start setting
those targets.
Setting those, yeah.
Makes sense.
And I do, to Regina's point, I do think that Kat and Brian will come in with much more disaggregated. Like, this is, for Dibbles, you're talking about multiple different areas that we're sort of throwing together into one data point. And so, it's more helpful for someone like me to look at individual points of, like, where are our gaps, where are our strengths in our curriculum, where are the challenges. And so this sort of summary gives you a little bit, but it doesn't give you actually what we really need and what we use to actually build our programming. And I don't have that.
Yeah, that was going to be my because that is the difficult part, like specifically if we're talking about, the reading, and you have it for grades 1 to 5.
Right.
A first grade reader is so different than a 5th grade reader, and if they are significantly below grade level at 5th grade, that's all those years that you've missed.
Right.
That can bring them up. So I think that's where that data is helpful.
Right. And you don't know in this, right?
No.
So
Yeah.
we could have, 39% of special ed students who are well below benchmark. If 33% of those students are in 4th or 5th grade, that's troublesome.
There's a very different story
Yeah.
than first grade.
Right.
Any other questions or comments for Danielle? So, thank you so much for giving us this overview, and yeah, we'll look forward to the next conversation, but appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Okay, so now I am back on track. So this is the chair's report now, but what I'm actually wondering if you all would be okay with, I can see that we still have some community members who are here, and I think they're patiently waiting to for the calendar conversation. I'm wondering, is it okay if we can just transition to that item under the chair's report first? Okay. Just the bit of framing, we have, so obviously in December we had a step of taking a vote as a committee to provide some guidance to Dr. Burrows in developing a draft of the actual calendar for next year that would reflect the conversations to date at that point. That is what we have in our folder. We have a draft calendar. We are hoping to vote to approve a calendar, within these next couple meeting or two. So we have a vote on our agenda for tonight. If we, through our discussion, arrive at the place of voting to approve a calendar, we have the option to do that. We also have the option to just kind of continue the discussion. And we do not have to vote to approve an actual calendar tonight if we don't feel ready to do that, or if other questions come up. Obviously, we have continued to hear feedback. I want to point out we did receive an email like moments before our meeting started. We received another email earlier today. So I know that we're weighing different things as we consider the options before us. But so that's just where we're at tonight. We don't have motion language in our motions document because I'm just, one option for a motion would be to approve this draft calendar that has been presented to us as is, to approve it with some recommended edits, or again, to not take the step of approving an actual calendar. Tonight is also one of the choices that we have as we continue this element of our responsibility. So I guess with that, I'll just open up to where people are in our thinking, sort of at this point in the conversation, the inputs we've received, and with an actual calendar to consider, which is an important step. Thank you for taking the time to draft this, because up until this point, our conversations have remained rather abstract. The last time we discussed this in December, I had attempted to frame this through scenarios with actual implications from, of dates. We did receive a proposal of a scenario that was not among those we considered. And yet we haven't actually taken the step of looking at the kind of how this would map onto FY26 yet. So here we have it, and the graphic design template still looks amazing. So thanks again to Anna for helping us improve that piece last year for this year.
And was stolen by some independent districts as well.
Really? Well, anyway, so we'll open it up. Open it up there.
Right. Perfectly legal. I have a question about the calendar that is not related to the holidays.
Great. Thank you, because that's also this is also our opportunity to respond to what we see before us here. Not only the religious holiday days off, not implications, but also what's proposed for other things. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. One small thing, I wouldn't call the 29th of August Labor Day observed. Although I get to just day off. I guess my question was around the half days, the early dismissal days, right? We got feedback from community around those are disruptive. I think they're incredibly vital in order to provide professional learning opportunities for teachers. Understand they're disruptive, but were there ways in which we could make them more anticipatable, if that's a word, for family members. And I think most of these seem to fall on Thursdays with a few on Wednesdays. So just really wanted to know.
I'm actually looking at this, and we had actually moved these. I'm looking up above at the draft that was put in here, which says scenario 3.
Yep.
It looks to me like the edit we made to the half days wasn't carried over in this scenario, because we had talked about, I believe it was the second
Tuesday?
It was the second Tuesday or second Wednesday.
Absolutely.
So that would be a change from what we have here. In response to what you're talking about, that it was hard for people to track.
Yes.
Like, okay, like it's in the third week, it's in the second
Yeah.
week, it's on a Friday, it's on a Tuesday.
Right.
And so for this year, taking that feedback, we, and let me see, while you all are talking, I'll see if I can find the other version that has the correct half days.
And I think also just like looking at, when we look at when those half days fall, just being like mindful of like, if it was a 4-day week the week before, right, could we potentially move it to, like not do it the next week, but maybe the week after or something, just so that there's not interrupted learning. Because like I think that one of the biggest feedback I get is like, oh, no full week of school this month or whatever, you know, and just kind of like spacing it out thoughtfully so that it doesn't feel like every week is not a full week.
Yeah, November.
Looking.
There's no full week there.
Right.
Yeah. Right, and some you can't help, but it's just
Yeah.
like, you know, there is flexibility, I think.
Well, I know, sorry.
No, go ahead.
November 4th is election day, right? Is it
Yes.
the Tuesday? Right. And then November 11th is Veterans Day. And then the 20th is early dismissal. Is it possible to put that at 20th to November 10th?
I guess I had the question, like later in the year, there is no TV. Is there a rationale for that?
Usually it does affect practices within the year and roll it out. You front load it more than back load it. And then you have testing, all the MCAS that occurs in April and May. So it becomes more difficult.
And we have an early dismissal the Wednesday before February vacation. Could we just put that on Friday?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, from those comments, it sounds like there still needs to be some work around the PD days, the early dismissals, and just making sure to look through that lens and incorporate the feedback that we got from the community, which is, one, we want to have consistency around when those days are going to be, and as much as possible, you know, make sure that there are full weeks of school in a month's time. So I think that's, and I'm just, you know, sort of broadly summarizing what we heard, so that I think says to me that we may not be ready to vote on the calendar today. But there is sort of the larger discussion, I think, around, you know, our prior decision around the religious holidays and what we want to do. And one of the biggest takeaways that I see from the current proposed, the draft calendar for the following year, is that even removing, sort of abiding by the decision that was made, it doesn't necessarily shorten the school year drastically. So I just want to note that, that if sort of in that spirit of listening or taking into account this desire for a shorter school year, we haven't necessarily achieved that. And so that really, for me, opens up the conversation of taking into account what we heard tonight and what we have heard over email, and how we can push ourselves to continue to think through this more.
I think the other thing that, and maybe I'm just not seeing it, is like, although this version does not have Good Friday, Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Kippur, I think it still needs to be listed on the column, because I think it's completely removed, and I don't think that was the intention.
No. Yeah.
So, and I think also maybe, we talk about being inclusive and representing the students, in fact, our school community. So it would be nice to kind of find out what holidays students and families celebrate and incorporate more of those, because, the way to recognize, right, like that we're physically, and maybe that list will get longer, but I think it's a nice gesture to
Is that
add.
the Franklin? Was that Franklin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be nice.
Yeah.
And yeah, also some just aren't, like maybe we didn't. I thought, like President's Day, for example, is always encompassed within our February break, but it's also not listed here. So I do think the important dates, like column, is missing.
Right.
Yeah. Patriots Day.
A number of things that need to be there, but it is the opportunity, as you're naming, which we have discussed, to flesh it out even further. We had talked about that, especially in the context of not having days off for holidays, knowing that no matter what we're doing, we're not having days off for all the holidays that are being celebrated. So looking for that opportunity to acknowledge them, and then separately from that, build out the policy and the procedures accordingly. But yeah, that's an important point.
And I can, like, once you have collected all of those, I can work with Charlene, because I think it's going to be a lot of formatting. So I will, it's one thing to, like, retype stuff, but like when you're adding more, it just completely, I don't think this version would be able to do that. So I'll work with her on that.
So we've identified a couple of things that are still in progress here. Just naming, obviously, for this scenario that we're looking at, it still assumes days off on August 29th and let's see, but
November 26th.
not a, yeah, sorry, and November 26th. And, we are still very early on in bargaining, but we heard the message from the community and from this committee about opening a discussion about the prospect of, exploring one or both of those days as school days, and that is still very early in the process. So we are not able at this time to make commitments to any changes on either of those, but just to name that. I mean, if that makes sense for that reason, that it's assumed in this scenario that we will not have school on those days, which has been our practice and which is in our contract currently.
Yeah, this is a perfect year, though, in my mind, that, removing one of those 2 days, having the last day of school be on the 15th, on that Monday, I think it's not, I understand that's where the calendar lies, but I guess, being able to push that to the Friday, I just think you're going to have such low attendance on that Monday. It's going to be not great. And so I guess a question I'd have is there, I guess you can't add there's no way to add the other day back to have it end on a Tuesday. Just ending on a Monday is never a way
No.
I try and into school calendar because no one's going to show back up.
Probably a few days, right? Like
Oh,
even if
for
it's a
snow.
Monday, Tuesday, I don't think. they'll
Monday,
do it.
Tuesday, I think. I mean, if you have a couple days, they'll still show up. But it's the Monday half day. Like, am I gonna delay my vacation to be at school for a single half day? Anyways,
And coming back for school for 2 days, and then you have another 4 days
Right,
off, is
yeah.
also very interesting.
In September.
you're talking about in August.
In
Yeah,
August,
yeah, in
the last
August,
week of
yeah.
August, after 2 months off for summer break, you come back for 2 days, have 4 days off.
Yeah. And I think we've looked at districts that start after Labor Day, right?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, that was a big push too. Okay.
And I was still trying to advocate having those half days before a long weekend or a weekend.
Which one, the PD days?
Yeah, the PD days, like half days.
Professional learning. If you want teachers to focus on PD, you're asking them to do that on a Friday afternoon. That is rough. That's not successful in my experience. So I think we have to, in my mind, keep in mind what that half day is for, and that half day is for, again, the teacher's professional practice. I want that to be as effective as possible. Obviously, correct me.
But I think
That
the
makes sense.
consistency piece is the
Yeah.
big one too.
Then keep it on Wednesday if possible. Right in the middle of the week. No one's getting anywhere.
We do ours on Wednesdays.
So Peter, you're taking notes of the questions and points that we're raising. I guess I would like to return to something you raised, Selena, and just because I'm actually curious, and I'm gonna ask whether any of us are thinking differently, or I'm just curious like how people are thinking, because we have received some feedback, mostly from members of our Jewish community, but also from members of other faith communities as well, that we hadn't heard before our previous discussion when we voted to provide guidance. And that was feedback we had heard through the survey, but we had not heard it, I don't believe, as clearly in other ways. And, you know, we have heard more of it now, and we've, for me, I think I think the email we received that was signed by a number of individual clergy members in our community had an impact on me. So I guess I'm just wondering where we are as a group. I want to acknowledge that, Selena, you raised this. I'm sort of uplifting it also, and you and I voted in the minority on that decision. And so that's, you know, important to acknowledge, which leaves me, though, curious about the rest of us and where we are with this now in terms of how you're thinking about it. The religious holiday piece, I mean, religious and cultural holiday, day off, question, conversation, if that wasn't clear, but that's what I'm wondering about.
So I thought the scenario 6 was a great effort at trying to come to kind of a middle ground, right? Like in terms of what can we do to accommodate with the holidays, with the days that we can be flexible on. So I thought that was good. I think my only reservation with that is, I think it can get confusing for families every year, right? Like, oh, and just because I think people get used to certain things and they're like, I thought it was, this day was there and it's not there this year. It's hard to keep track of, and I think you're going to get a similar feedback as to like not having consistent half days, right? Like, hey, why is that off this year? But so I think that's going to be an issue, and more room for error in terms of like scheduling, tests, sports activities, all of those things. I think it complicates that. So, but I thought it was a good effort. When I was reading the signatures at the bottom, I was curious about, the Catholic Church, and I was glad that Father Bennett wrote in from there, because I thought that perspective was also helpful to have. So one thing I do appreciate is that, there are many strong faiths in this community, and I appreciate their point of view on all of it, and it's a lot for us to consider. And I mean, at this point, I don't have a decision, like in terms of which way to go, because I think we don't have many days off many days to work with, and I think a lot of it, the 2 days that we have really are depending on bargaining this year. So that's all I have. It's really just nothing useful to contribute at this point, basically.
I would say that since we are so data-driven, we have surveyed the whole community regarding this topic, and I think we should respect the democracy decision that collectively made together by the members of this community, not just us sitting here. We have heard from not just the current student body, but also parents, staff from all 6 schools that we have in the district, right? And even residents who are not affiliated with schools anymore. So I feel like we have been trying to make this effort to collect voices, and we should respect the voices that we have received. But also, like, we hear all the comments that coming up like after we collect the survey data. But we can add those into the data that we collected, but that doesn't make a huge difference. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point. I thought the 6th, I can really appreciate the group thinking creatively and outside the box. I think the 6th scenario is an outside the box idea. I would also be concerned about the consistency, how you do that given the holidays rotate. And so if it's one holiday's turn and it's on a Saturday, where does that rotate? And again, just from a consistency with staff. And I think, again, it still has the long-term problem that we've raised when we talked about this last year, even, of just how do we assess in the future as a committee what holidays to add, right? What holidays become a part of the rotation, like what level of participation within our community for a particular holiday warrants being recognized within this 2-day off rotation. I think that still then becomes a math problem of what is the, again, pure number of students or number of people within the town that at that point we will respect with a day off. And to me also, just as I still don't think that utilizing days off as a leverage for highlighting diversity, to me that still from an educational lens is not like the way to highlight the diversity and to increase awareness within the town. It really comes back to the work that needs to be done on the curriculum level and the cultural celebration level within our schools and the communities we are building inside the schools, to recognize this, to make students feel good and celebrated about taking that time away from school, right, and not have the negative effects that one of the public commenters talked about. which again is true for kind of lots of things that occur, unfortunately, within kind of student and adult peer groups. But again, we need to create strong communities that fight against those urges and support people's identities and their decisions to take a day off for their religion or for other personal or cultural events within their lives.
I think what we've been hearing and granted, it's anecdotal and it's, from far fewer individuals than completed the survey, though. But I do think that an important theme of the feedback that we've received since our discussion and vote that we took is really amplifying a concern that was raised within our survey data, which was that the survey data really looked different depending on how you broke it down.
Mm-hmm.
And the feedback we've been receiving has been from members of our community who are asking to, who are sharing a concern about feeling a sense of belonging and inclusion in our school community as people who identify with what is essentially a religious minority in the town of Milton, but a substantial and important population. And so to me, that's where I have a problem just negating that feedback. To me, the concern I've really felt acutely over the past few weeks is that the personal anecdotal feedback that has been shared, and with me personally, in addition to emails that we've received and conversations I've had with individuals, is that what gave me pause from our survey data has been bearing out in the testimony, basically, of members of our community who are sharing like a reaction to the conversation we've been having. So I just need to say that. And to me, that does make me then curious about the value of, even if it's a symbolic gesture, like what that could actually represent as a possible, like we swung a pendulum in our conversation toward equality, essentially, in how we treated holidays, in that we're not taking days off, with the exception of, which was raised, Christmas Eve, which is neither a federal holiday, but will, as we see here, continue to be represented, continue to be honored as a day off within winter break. I think the idea of sort of continuing through this process to think about this idea that hadn't been on our radar. It had not been and I feel responsible because I workshopped those 5 scenarios that we presented. That was my personal attempt to support us in synthesizing the large amount of information that had been brought forward, and I did not think of that 6th scenario myself. It was not then one that was presented for us to consider. I don't know if it would have made a difference, in the outcome of the guidance that we then provided to you. But I am thinking more and more about it in context of previous feedback and discussions. I remember the metaphor that was shared around going out of our way to be hospitable hosts, which ultimately that's what we're trying to do as a school district, And so I don't know, Mark, to the point about, I think we are balancing, and I don't think has to be all or nothing. Anna, you articulated really important concerns about clarity, consistency. I do think for us to even entertain the sixth scenario, which for anybody listening was, what that is, was this idea that we would, which has been proposed to us, was that we would have 2 days. We currently have 2 religious holidays as days off in our calendar. Historically, for 30 years, that has been Yom Kippur if it's a weekday, or Rosh Hashanah if Yom Kippur is on a weekend, and Good Friday. What was proposed as a different idea was that we would take 2 days that would essentially rotate through these holidays. We've established it's hard to have 5 total days off. That's too much. Anyway, my point is, like, if we were going to even entertain that idea, it would have, to me, it would be a notation on our calendar, a footnote that says Milton Public Schools, celebrates cultural and religious holidays with 2 days off per year. It could say this is to limit, like this is to contain the amount of time that we spend. I don't know what the wording would be, but the point could be articulated there that like this is an intentional practice of rotating through holidays. And it would totally create a burden on future school committees to follow through, on like implementing that yearly with you when you're building out the calendar. We're always doing that because it depends. Even here, you see January 2nd is proposed as a day off next year because who's coming back for the Friday? That's the point about Monday, June 15th. Like every year we're making choices based on how the calendar falls. Anyway, right? And we're being guided by like reason and what we think of as what lets us meet our priorities the best we can. So I don't know, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place, but it is because I feel really, honestly, I feel badly for where we've ended up to continue receiving this heartfelt feedback that we've been getting. I don't think we have arrived yet at a place that fully achieves what I think the intent was when we set out on this process. And maybe because I've been in this conversation for 4 years, so I'm also probably, a little bit tired of feeling like I haven't hit on it yet. But I think we've established already we're not able to vote on the calendar because there are other missing pieces that don't pertain to the holidays anyway, which we have to continue to resolve. So at least we know that, but I'm sorry, I just had to say some of those things.
So I've been thinking a lot about the sixth scenario, and I appreciate the thought and the creativity of it. My concern, and this is somebody who's not vested in any of those holidays, right? That it feels a bit like we're not representing anything then. Do you know what I mean? So if you're rotating 2 holidays, do the people for whom Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah is very important and those aren't on there for 3 years, are we really representing their desire? Similarly, somebody, if it's like, Good Friday is very important to me, it sort of feels like you've lost the intent or the importance of all of them. It feels just very watered down, and now they're just 2 days as opposed to 2 specific days that represent the culture or the religion. And so that's where I'm struggling, because if it's a rotation of it, then it sort of says I don't know that that answered any of the questions. Like, for me, coming in and hearing about it, that it was important that people's cultural or religious holidays are represented, but then it sort of feels like you're in no man's land with that, for me. And that's it's just, I just don't know what that, I understand it from a symbolic gesture, but I'm not sure that everybody's intent for having those days on the calendar was necessarily just symbolic. And so I don't, and I'm speaking for people who, it's not me, but that's just the takeaway that I have, is it doesn't feel.
Well, I think that's like, it's the idea of something symbolic rather than nothing. Like, that something symbolic is meaningful as an alternative to.
But if I played that out, say theoretically, if it's been, you know, that I or my child doesn't need to miss school on a particular holiday that's very important to us, you haven't answered that. Like, because the next year you are going to miss it. Like, that desire to be recognized or not be recognized, or have to proclaim anything or have that day off, that's not answered. Do you know what I mean? That issue still is there, and that's the piece that I struggle with. It's not there for a particular year, but then for wherever you are in the cycle, it is there. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that's the part that it feels like now that scenario isn't answering really any of the issues that seem to have been brought up. For me, at least in my head, I'm not able to.
And I think all the letters that we received and public comment, I think all of them spoke from the importance of that holiday for the people that celebrate it. And I think you're right, it misses the significance of it. If I can't celebrate it this year and I have to wait till next year or the following year to celebrate, then it kind of dilutes the importance of it. And I think I think it's a good suggestion to be inclusive, but I think it kind of misses the point, because I'm going to speak for myself. I grew up going to Good Friday service as a kid. I was in church all day. But, you know, so I can't imagine, like, one year I went and the next year I was in school, and then, you know, like, so on and so forth. So there's that consistency, that religious education that I had through my church community that I received. So it's like, you know, or do you take your kid out of school that following year, and what if there's a test scheduled that day? Or, you know, like, it's hard to keep up with, you know, schedules and so on and so forth, because we're already taking 2 days somewhere else off. Like, I don't know, I think it gets really confusing, and there's more room for error. I do think, like, I think where members who wrote into us, like, they came at it, I just think it needs to, if we're gonna do it, we have to give it the importance that they're asking. And I don't know if that solution does it for me.
There's so much I want to say on this point. I think, you know, frankly, I've been thinking about this from the first conversation we had, and felt that I didn't perhaps do an adequate enough job at stating sort of my concern with the way we went. We started this conversation from a desire to be inclusive, from a desire to have our students feel a greater sense of belonging, all of our students. And we ended in sort of a place where said, no, let's go back to the status quo that was 30 years ago, and we're not going to celebrate, you know, the holidays that have been voiced as being very important to members of our community. And to say that we're going back to the status quo in the name of increasing, right, belonging and inclusivity, that felt to me like the easier decision to make. One that did not allow us to wrestle and grapple with the issue, you know, that the ask that was made of us, rightly so. And I am so glad that members from the Jewish community have articulated much better than I could have the impact that that's going to have on families, on students of our decision. It's a big decision that we made. And obviously, I was part of the minority with Lizzie on sort of not voting in favor of that decision, because sort of going backwards doesn't feel like it's the right way to go. We had, the question before us years back was, do we consider adding Eid as another holiday? That was the question. And from there, we went way the other way of saying, well, let's include everything. Obviously, that is not pragmatic. We can't do it in a way that then satisfies and answers the concerns we heard from the survey. When we went to the community and we surveyed people and we had conversations, we were clear, at least in the conversation that I was part of, that that was going to be one factor in our decision making. But it wasn't going to be the reason why we went a certain way. It was just going to be one variable that we were going to consider in our decisions. But along that, I want us to make sure that we're also considering those voices that are coming forward now and letting us know the impact that that's going to have at the individual, at the family level, and at a community level. And what does that say about Milton? We have been making progress and moving in the right direction, not only as a school district, I would say as a community. And so that I would encourage us to continue to think outside of the box, think about how we can be more inclusive. And I would say, rather than rotating holidays at this point, can we go back and consider making the addition that was asked of us, which was one additional holiday. That was it. For the time being, it's not the permanent solution. We can continue to then, for 24, 25, 26, we can make that decision right now and then continue and, sort of ask the school committee to continue to think through this with members of the community to come up with to arrive at a place that feels that it is more inclusive, that it recognizes more of our community members. But just that decision of going back and just taking away because it feels like it's better to have this equal treatment also assumes that sort of guiding ourselves by the federal holidays is the way to go. Our nation, by no means, it creates a sense of belonging and inclusivity for all. So that is not what I would say that we need to do. Milton had made progress in the right direction 30 years ago, and now we're going back. So I would encourage us to continue to think through that. But for the immediate term, because we do need a calendar for the 25-26 year, add the holiday that we were asked to add, and that will not impact too much in terms of lengthening the school year, and then address the other concerns that we did hear in the survey around consistency of professional days, the half days, and making sure that we have full school weeks, et cetera. But I just I really do appreciate the community members that have taken the time to write to us, to come and speak, because I think we need to listen to those voices and know that we will be creating more harm than not by trying to approach this in the name of being equal. And that doesn't align with our values, I think, as a district and what I hope we aspire to be as a town.
So just to acknowledge that what you're raising here was also not a scenario that I brought forward, you know, because it is, while it's something we had discussed at length a year ago, we hit a fork in a road based on research we had done into other districts. Again, you're right, not based on any feedback we had received from Milton residents. It was research on other districts that took us down the fork of adding 3 holidays, not 1. And it was that decision point that led us to this next several months of the process, during which, quite honestly, we never actually reconsidered that idea, that original idea. So that is actually, you know, that is, yeah.
Well, I think
the
conversation we had, again, over a year ago at this point, when we first brought this up, like in October, November of 2023, was, again, when the public comment idea of adding Eid came in front of us. And it was, how do we create an equitable process and a clear process within the community to do this for any holiday? And I think at that point, and again, maybe this has changed, but it seemed that the consensus within the group was that, yes, a clear process would be helpful to make this so that if any person just show up at a school committee meeting to ask for a day off to be added to the calendar? Why would we prioritize one of those requests versus another? Why would we prioritize the particular religion, right? Part of the language has been around treating the Abrahamic religions similarly, which necessarily puts importance on the Abrahamic religions above every other religion type, which I think is problematic. And there's plenty of people who don't celebrate Abrahamic religion. So I think that's ultimately, from my perspective, where it got to, and then what led us to try and do research around okay, well, as we think about, again, making this inclusive more broadly, or think about a more clear process, what have other communities done? So again, I think that issue still holds for me as it relates to just adding Eid as a one-off. That has not gone away of, again, why would we add simply Eid and not either of these other 2? And what would be the process where we can be clear for the community in the future of why we would add one and not another? And then again, the language got to, well, we can't add all of them. And we haven't talked about even, again, we represent 1 Jewish holiday on the calendar. I know it has not been asked of us. There are 2 Jewish high holy days, as was named. Next year, both of those will hit the school calendar, right? There are 2 Eids, right? And so there are other things that, even in addition to what we've already discussed, could potentially be asked. And again, to me, it gets back to, I think there's too much. I don't think the emphasis is right to say that the day off is the epitome of respect and acknowledgement of cultural differences and, within a town or within our school community. That the way in which we most value you and recognize you as an individual is to say we're not going to have school because of your community. That seems the opposite of, again, just what school is about, which is about learning and community and bringing people together to learn together. So I still stay, again, just strongly against the idea that we must have a day off in order to recognize these folks, in order to recognize any group, and that to me, I'd rather have, again, people together, our kids together, our staff together, celebrate together, learn together about anything and everything that comes up, and how do we integrate that more within the readings we are doing within schools, the writing we are doing, the lessons we are doing, the celebrations and community building, as Pierce talked about, right? The the sense of belonging that you create within the school. Those to me are the things that are much, much more important than like sending kids home for the day.
And we have strong consensus on that, and that will, we've heard a commitment to that independent of the calendar. So it's not, I want to be careful. I personally think it's important to avoid like any type of mutually exclusive, like zero sum. It's not like we can have a day off or we can do a better job of learning about one another's cultures. I mean, I think we have to do the latter no matter what. And it becomes even more important, obviously, if we are not taking days off for holidays. Absolutely. Because, I think this, honestly, like continuing on the path of not taking any of these holidays as days off, it really, it increases the pressure and the stakes on the district to deliver on that in order to mitigate the harm that we are being told the taking away of a day off, or in the case of our Milton Muslim neighbors community, the not giving of a day off. Like, we will have to work to make sure that we are like really doing that, really providing opportunities we haven't done before around learning, curriculum, celebration. But I do, I think we could still be doing that if we we could have been doing that this whole time better than we've been doing it, right? So we all kind of, I think, understand that, and I think to me the appeal of the sixth scenario is that it acknowledges a symbolic gesture within the limitations of reality. But I think, we have other things on our agenda that we do have to get to. I continue to appreciate the thoughtfulness of everyone at this table. I think, we actually are the only ones who know what it's like to have to sit here and think and, talk about this way, with the pressures that we all are under. Since we're not voting tonight, I guess my question is where we go from here. You will be bringing us a revised draft of the calendar that accurately reflects sort of response to the community's feedback and the committee's feedback regarding professional learning time and that side of things, that can continue to better represent the days, the holidays on the right-hand side column. So those are a couple of the things that have emerged from this discussion. I'm from we're not taking a vote, but just what I'm sensing as consensus of the group is that there is not an appetite from the majority of the committee to rethink the approach to holidays. Is that accurate? I mean, I think I'm hearing strong ideas from a similar breakdown. So if that's the case, then I think, what the vote we took before was guidance. It was guidance to inform your process. It seems like the guidance is not changing substantially on the holiday front.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we have a lot of things to cover tonight. I just want to be mindful of the time. Is this something that maybe we take on in policy and kind of taking all the feedback that was received here and kind of work through and hash out the different scenarios, and Peter can take on the feedback that we gave on the actual calendar and the looking at the dates, but I think that holiday piece, and maybe we can look at maybe policy and procedure as well, to like Mark's point, like if we are just adding one holiday, what happens next year if another holiday needs to be added, and so on and so forth. So I think maybe bringing that, because we're done with our policy, so I think we could use that as an opportunity to kind of look at that in detail and just weigh all the pros and cons and maybe do a deep dive ourselves, and then bring it back here.
So we meet
We meet
for
on
policy
Tuesday.
next week.
Mhm.
Okay. And that would still
I
be.
mean, it's technically, like, we have like a future agendas and calendars on there based on your suggestion, but I think that might be a good kind of where we can really do a deep dive.
Okay. You're not going to be able to be at that policy meeting,
Correct.
but
no.
we can figure out how to convey the conversation of that, which would be before our next school committee meeting anyway. So I think that's a reasonable suggestion. But we can definitely expect, no matter what, obviously this is back before us. That will be February 5th. Okay. So thank you, everybody. You know, we will ultimately get to the point of a calendar.
I guess I just would say that I didn't hear necessarily that we were in the same place we were 2 weeks ago, but there had been perhaps slight shift of thinking. And I don't want to sort of assume, Anna, but I thought I heard you differently. And Amanda, I thought I heard you voice something that was a little bit different than 2 weeks ago in terms of, you know, even in sort of taking on the scenario 6, would that be sort of, you know, achieve what the intention of scenario 6 would be? But I don't know if I heard sort of that if you had been swayed in either direction.
I haven't heard anything, how do I put it? Scenario 6 it was interesting and I appreciated it, but I don't think that it answers anything for me. It doesn't, it muddies it a bit more for me, candidly, because it seems less clear as to the why. You know, what's the, I think to Anna's point, like, I don't mean to make it sound so factual, and because I know that there's a lot of emotion involved in it, but, you know, one of the things that I've recognized coming in here is this desire to have more policy and have more procedures in place and sort of have the why for the decisions that are made. And I think, you know, when you just said, like, bringing it to the policy committee, it makes sense because it's not taking the emotion out, obviously, it's taking in people's personal experience, but if there's a process by which days off are decided in a procedural way, that helps me. Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's because I think for me it does become, I kind of go back to where it started, that we're still struggling because of contractual obligations for days, so we don't have extra days to add, and then we're not answering the request for Eve being added in. So right now nothing has presented an alternative for me that makes sense yet from our last discussion.
Yeah, I think that's where we, like, I mean, I think all the, like, the feedback, your point of view on it is, you know, I really appreciate it, and obviously, like, the letters and the community members speaking, I mean, I appreciate the importance and their point of view on it, and also hearing, like I said, hearing from Father Bennett, who wasn't part of the original microgroup, right? Getting that point of view too was really important, because, you know, it's like, it's very strong. They're making a strong case for those days, right? But I think what I'm really struggling with, I don't have a scenario that, you know, is working, right, that I feel like comfortable to vote on. And I think that's where we need to come to, like, just really hash it out, look at those days. Mark's point of, you know, do you want to end school on a Monday? You know, like, all of those things should be looked at, I think, in tandem for us.
Okay.
And just figure out. And then hopefully we can come back here with, you know, we've taken all the survey data, we've taken the feedback from the community members, and then come back and like take the time to discuss it and just figure out what the best, you know, and come back with like, hey, or here are a couple of options. Any of these, you know, resonate, and hopefully also have a policy in place, you know, or a procedure in place of, in the future, if we need to add days, how do we go about doing that? And at that point, does it become an alternating, you know, maybe we end up going back to scenario 6 at that point. I don't know. I guess I just need more time to kind of talk through it.
Okay. Thanks.
But all of this was very
Yeah.
important for that
Yeah.
to happen.
Okay. For now. All right. Thank you, everybody. The next couple items under my report are hopefully going to be very quick. Okay. The municipal energy manager grant letter of support for the Climate Action Planning Committee. I want to apologize because I think it's been a little confusing, and I just want to update you very quickly on some back and forth. There's a letter template in our folder which is incomplete, and I left it there to be able to explain to you that the reason I left it incomplete, we are not signing this letter. We are not voting to approve that letter. In working through it and doing some back and forth, I think I've realized that the letter actually needs to be coming from the superintendent and the town administrator to support the application. Do you have anything you want to add to this?
Well, the other thing is just that it could potentially be a joint application with Randolph. So that could change the letter too.
The deadline is January 31st. I do think what's important for us and what I would like to offer as a motion is rather than submitting a letter of support per se, like on behalf of our committee, I do think what the Climate Action Planning Committee had initially brought forward to us was the request just for our support of the choice to apply for this grant. And so that is what I've put as language, a motion made to support. So I will make this motion, and then we can, if there are questions or discussion, I would like to make a motion to support the town of Milton and Milton Public Schools application for the Municipal Energy Manager grant.
I'll second.
Thank you. I think that language should stand whether or not we pursue a joint application with Randolph. The idea is to simply be able to lend our support to the choice of seeking this funding for this position.
Well, and if need be, you could sign off on behalf of the committee to support on a future, if we get a joint letter and, you know, they say, hey, it'd be great to have your signature, my signature, I think the
Sure.
support here would enable you to do that.
Yes, right. So this is just hoping to capture whether we as a committee support moving forward with this application for this position, which would help the town and the district better achieve our sustainability goals, which we know we can't do within our current limited resources as a town and a district. So are there questions or discussion of this?
I just had a question on, I mean, if we can get additional funding for a resource within the town, fantastic. I know when we applied for like a particular fire grant, it then tied the town to say, hey, we provide this funding for these positions for 3 years, and then y'all have to pick them up as a requirement within the grant application. Just wondering if there's anything here around that, if there's like, you know, long-term financial commitments that the town would need to pick up that are required by this. Obviously, we could opt to carry this position forward if we don't get the funding, but that was my only question.
Yeah, I had the same question.
I hadn't heard that the presentation from the Climate Action Committee nor from Nick, so.
It's not usually standard, but I, again, just
Yeah.
thought of it from the fire department, federal application they were doing.
I mean, it would be a town position, not a school position.
Yeah.
So I did not see anything language to that effect, Mark. It's noted in the Mass Save website, linked in the, it says to take, this is a 3-year grant. Provides 3 years to create up to a full-time energy manager role. I'm just scanning through this to see if it says the Municipal Energy Manager Grant helps municipalities hire a dedicated resource to manage their energy use, become more energy efficient, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from facilities with a particular focus on K-12 school buildings. So I don't see any reference here to that requirement that you're wondering about.
But is this funding the full position, or is it a grant towards the funding of the position?
$120,000.
Okay, so that's the
Probably
number.
covered.
Where did you see?
That was on the website.
Oh.
Sorry.
I was like, did I miss a number?
Full, up to $120,000 a year towards salary and benefits for full-time. Or $60,000 for part-time.
So if
So this
we're
is the-
going, partnering with Randolph, then would it be a part-time? Like, is that right?
Or maybe be a full-time between the two communities.
I think it would be a
But I-
full-time position shared between the two. I mean, I
Okay.
I mean, obviously, if the town as a whole needed additional allocation, that would need to go through the budget process
Yeah.
anyways, outside of.
They have a
our
certain
purview.
amount of funding, and I believe I heard something to the effect of if you ask for half-time, you may be more likely to get it if they're trying to split the resource among more towns.
Yeah. So I think the real question for us here is, you know, in voting whether or not to support the application, what we're doing is to support the judgment of you, Tom McCarthy, and Nick, who would be working together to determine what makes the most sense for Milton in the application, and then if funded, the implementation of the position.
Nick Connor, I think, is more essentially involved than Milana.
Okay. Okay, but
Yeah.
Okay.
either way, are people prepared to take a vote on this?
Yeah, I'm looking through the deliverables on the guidebook, and it's not
Yeah.
saying anything.
All right, so we have a motion. It's been made and seconded. All in favor? Okay, great, thank you. The FY24 annual report, I'm sorry, I got confused and was talking about this earlier, but this is what we had received in our email. This is what we have to approve annually. This is actually much streamlined from previous
It's a lot
versions
more.
that we've seen, so thank you for that. I hope that everyone had the opportunity to read it from our email, and I'm sorry for the delay in getting it into our folder.
Stephanie did great work on this and recognized that it needed an overhaul and spent a lot of time just bringing it down to say something meaningful and not, you know, the report had become fairly sprawling.
Yes. Yeah.
She did a great job.
Yeah, 9 pages. That's way better.
And so this is a report that we submit to DESI, right? annually.
Yeah, and to
30 pages last year.
30, yeah.
Yep.
10, 30. This goes to the town too.
And to the town, published in
Yeah.
the book. Okay.
I haven't grammar checked it, but I'll make a motion to approve the FY24 annual report as submitted.
I second.
Second, all right. All in favor? Great. Okay. I can save my other update for the capital item that we have a little bit later and just move straight to finance.
I know we're already at 10:30, so want to keep this quick, but we got important things to share. FY26 budget, we are still working through budget conversations. The last couple of meetings, we focused a little bit more on the Q2, FY25 Q2 report, but we have talked about the FY26 budget. I think one of the things we started talking about today a bit is discussions around, it seems unlikely that the full list of needs that kind of came before this committee will get support through select board, warrant committee, kind of all those entities. So I think for our perspective, we need to at least understand what the ones we want to fight for, if any, are within the needs-based budgeting, I should be clear. So we started having conversations around that of, what would the district, what are the highest leverage asks? And then again, what is kind of, there's still ongoing conversation that needs to be had between us and select board around what the number is going to be. Again, that continues to be hard given we are not having any direct conversations with select board given they have no finance committee. That is a bit challenging. And then we are still waiting to meet with the warrant committee as well. So we don't have any additional feedback from them either on kind of our budget at this point. So those are the high level kind of discussions we're still having. And I think the other piece we started talking about today a bit is we just need to start crafting like what is our messaging around the ask, because it's a big ask. It's going to be a big ask to a lot of different groups, the town as a whole, and obviously select board. And so like how do we make the most compelling case for this? And so I think that's something the finance committee will need to talk through and kind of create some proposals for, but obviously this group will need to carry a lot of that water and want y'all's input on like what the messaging is ultimately. So if y'all have thoughts or ideas.
So is the select board, like, are they saying that it's just like are they saying this I haven't watched their meetings, are they saying this at their meetings, or like is this like kind of Nick's like meeting with you guys, like how is the kind of
In terms of like the needs base, yeah, it's reading the tea leaves of Nick's of the select board comments around the size of the level service ask alone. We'll have more information. The select board is meeting on Tuesday, and they're bringing in all departments to talk about their level service needs. And really, what they're talking about, I believe, is more level service and what are the cuts if you're not giving level service. I don't know if they're talking about needs at all across any other department. And so.
So are we going in front of select board then? When the other departments are going?
Yeah, next week.
We are.
Okay.
So again, to talk at a high level, but again, we obviously don't have any direct communication with any of the department folks, just with Nick. At this point, Nick has not presented anything to us or to the select board around a needs-based number.
So do you have to craft your message then before Tuesday, or is it like kind of like, are you just like, I'm just.
Well, we're not going to have a final budget Tuesday because we won't have voted on it.
Yeah.
They're going to share, I think, a version, I'd assume, and Katie, you can speak for yourself, but I assume a version of the presentation they've kind of given to us to like explain how we've gotten to that level service number, like, try and explain why it is so big. I assume that is a question they will ask.
Yeah.
And yes, to your point, kind of start having some of that messaging, but I think we'll need to continue to refine that further, again, especially as we bring this to, any override is going to require a wider audience. And so how do we talk about this with the broader community?
I guess the other thing I would add to, relative to next week, is the thing we haven't shared as much here, which I think we will share next week, is the impact of, percentages of level service not being met, and what the impact is in terms of what excuse me, what kind of positions that would mean.
Do you mean if they?
Meaning if we don't get 1 million of our level service, if we have to cut 1 million, that equals this many teachers, this many administrators, class sizes, cutting back on extracurriculars, just all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a separate budget we will need to create, and I assume, again, vote on as a school committee is a non-override budget. What those cuts would result in, because that will be part of the warrant for the town as well, in case it doesn't pass the town vote. I don't know if it's necessary if the town vote happens first, so that's a question, as some people have talked about the town vote coming before the town meeting vote, but.
I think in the short term, it's first immediately the select board next Tuesday, and then the messaging will roll out, town meeting, voters of the town. I mean, to what you're saying, we can support the select board to have a constructive discussion of this challenge by helping them understand the concrete, like, cause and effect of different options that they might choose to take. So the more concrete we can make it, as far as like what we're actually talking about with cuts or needs left on the cutting room floor or what have you, like, I think that will be really important, since we know how many things they're needing to consider all the time. So just like cutting to the chase of the impacts of the decisions, I think, is something that we can be helpful in, providing that lens and information for them.
So I don't know if it was a scenario or feedback or comment that was made, was if there wasn't an appetite or a belief that the full amount for level service, which would require an override, would pass, would they come back with a lower number? And I guess my question is, would that come from the select board if it was like, well, we think that we could go for X, and then would that come in that meeting? And then you go back and do okay.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll come out at Tuesday with an exact number. They might, but it certainly would come out of the select board.
Right,
a select board meeting.
Yeah,
and I
that would be nice.
assume sooner than later, given where we're at within the calendar.
At their last meeting, it was stated that Nick, I believe, was asked the question and answered that it would be important to arrive to the number by early February. That's what I heard him say, I think, right? So they're meeting on January 28th. They may or may not, vote on something next week. But if not next Tuesday, it would be like shortly thereafter.
So would it be a number for the override or okay.
I haven't gone through overrides before in a town, but is it customary to do an override with just a needs-based versus,
You mean just level service?
Just level service,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Yeah, just level service versus needs-based. It seems to me that it's
Because you're going to need an override right after.
If that's the lens that you take to push an override, why would you do all that if you're not looking forward? And it might be just me not having gone through it before.
But I think my concern is, and I'm hoping maybe I misheard it, but that a conceivable scenario is not even needs-based.
I mean, not even
Not even
level
level
service.
level
Not
service.
even level service.
Something less than
Less
level
than,
service.
something less than,
So
so which would still mean an override but cuts.
But, sir, that's a lot of energy and political capital to use for something that's not
Not
even
gonna
going to
carry
get
it.
us to where we need to be. And even in terms of, I think, of our needs budget, it's pretty tapered.
Yes.
It's not
Right, it's
even
just-
No, it's not.
needs.
Yeah,
It's really,
I mean, it was
It's
hard
minimal, yeah.
listening to Dr. Fish come in and say, we're not getting any of our positions funded this year. Like, I mean, we haven't even had this conversation, and he's already saying that, you know, so it's like,
It's just,
Yeah.
it's hard to hear those comments.
digging our hole
Right,
deeper.
and unfortunately, I know with like special ed, a lot of those are mandated and you're required, so you're cutting in general ed, right? Like, because those are the only areas, like, you're gonna have those classes of 29 and 32 kids, right? So, because you can't provide
Well,
the
and if
quality.
if we have to cut, $2 million from our budget, we're looking at class sizes of, 35, 30. I mean, you're talking like a significant increase across the board at all grade levels.
Right,
And
and I
that's
think,
something that I think that's, we realize, I think Katie and I recognize the need to really convey clearly what the impact is of the gradients of an override, right, as opposed to just focusing on level service and needs based, but really helping understand, like, it's obvious that with no override, I think we figured out it was 60 positions or something like that. But I think it's important to share what $1 million looks like, or $1.5 million, or like what the impact is, what it looks like, just so that the select board has a full picture of what it looks like. And then, of course, in terms of an override, and it's my first time going through an override too, or the potential of an override, but generally, like, in my understanding, you bank up some funding in the first years, and then you have it for the following years as costs increase. So if we start with a somewhat of a deficit, not even getting to level service, it has a feeling to me of we're stuck in a vicious cycle of kind of increasingly challenging year after year, as opposed to kind of setting a pathway to move towards stability. So that's challenging.
and I don't think if you do an override and, if you have to do one the next year because you can't,
You're
like,
correct.
there's no appetite for that.
It's not gonna happen.
I think you're stuck with it for 5 years, well, at least 3 to 5 years, so, I think that's gonna be really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think the town has gotten away from doing regular overrides, and federal funding was a part of that, and I think there's been, I said this before, like, it feels like, and again, there's been turnover within the town department, right? Nick's never done an override within this town, within the school department. Peter, Katie have never done an override. Nobody at this table has done an override. Only Richard is the only one who I think he was on the select board when the last override happened, but maybe not even that. Maybe it was the police chief. So there's not much experience there, but we're going to need to build that muscle and have it more consistent. At the end of the day, there is a number that is going to be untenable for the town, and I think the balance is X dollar amount, better than zero, right? Is getting like this amount for an override, because the alternative is you go for an amount that's too big, and Braintree obviously did this. I think it was Braintree, right? Did this, and they were worried about if we go for the amount we really want, it's going to fail, and then we'll get nothing. And so we'll find it in the middle. And maybe they cut it too low, and they could have asked for more, and they could have gone for 10 million instead of the 8 million they went for. But like at the end of the day, the calculation they made and the calculation we will need to make is what is that level we can push to where it's worth it and we think people will pass it, and we can, again, getting back to the messaging, we can sell the message and make a compelling case of why it is needed and why people will reach into their pocket and pay more on a monthly basis in order to fund these services for the town.
But
And that is just, again, at the end of the day, there is a breaking point, and I think nobody knows exactly what that breaking point is, and that's just what we got to figure out, what we want to advocate for, and we need to align that number to what the select board wants to advocate for.
Right. I mean, I know, like, last time we did an override, it was like 3.7 or something like that, so it was really low, right, like the number. So obviously there's sticker shock, but I also feel like if we go in with a number where we can't even have level service, the quality is going to go down, and then at that point, will anyone support like people want to see return on their investment, right? Like that's part of it. So if you're asking them to invest $5 million and they're like, okay, and then all of a sudden, you know, scores, everything goes down, they're like, wait, I just gave you $5 million. Like, what do you, like, so there's also
But you're going
that.
to charge me 3 times more for my trash.
No, I
Yes.
totally agree with that. And I totally agree with Selena's point that it seems like a lot of work to go through to not even get any needs, to not expand
my
your
kid
program.
is in a classroom with 35 kids, but you're just asking me to, like, it's not going to work. You know, that just,
you're not going to give, like, and that's going to be the thing, too. It's like, if I'm not, I think for people, like voters, you know, taxpayers, whoever, like parents, like, I think when they see improvement in the quality of education, as Dr. Fish said, it has been a drop of students going to private schools, right? It could be school is improving. It's, you know, it's come a long way since in the last couple of years. You know, there's also the factor of, like, the cost of everything is up, right? Like, people are trying to hold on to more of their money, right? So there's that too. So are people willing to invest more into their student school to get high quality education, right? Which would be overall cheaper, right? But they also want to see, like, oh, okay, the schools are improving and they're doing great. Like, this is great. I'm making an investment in my town. But if you don't see that, then will people do it? And will we come back to, I'm going to pull my kid out because they're not getting.
and I think this is where it gets back to the framing you're going to do next week and how important that is of the impact that reductions would have on our overall.
And I think, I mean, it comes back to, like, you know, like when we did the budget closeout last year, and we had the shortage in special ed, like, that's something that we had to pay. So we have to take that from somewhere else that it could have been used, right? So that's something that we're obligated to do no matter what. So that's where it's like, it's also concerning when we have to cut positions, we have to cut in areas that are not mandated, you know? So I think that's where it gets really tricky too.
Yes, you're highlighting all the challenges. Great, appreciate it.
I don't know, I'm more on the boat of, like, you know, go big or go home, but I don't know. Because I think we're in a tough spot either way.
We'll send you to the select board.
Put her in front of the select board, right?
Also, Katie, thank you in advance for presenting next Tuesday. I will be there. Any of us are welcome to attend. You know, that's a way
Tuesday
to
at 7.
sort of stay up to date in real time on the discussion that unfolds. And from there, we will just definitely talk about this in further depth at our next meeting, right?
Absolutely.
We will.
There's a lot that needs to be happening in these next couple weeks.
We can move this up in the agenda at our next meeting also, so that it is not something we have to get to so late at night too. I mean, we can consider doing that.
Second piece is the SY25 quarter 2 budget that was provided in the folder. Hopefully people were able to take a look at it. The highlights of that is we have concerns. There is an ongoing kind of structural deficit within our budget, which is part of the reason for the large FY26 request in order to right-size that budget. Is the reason we had the $4 million deficit coming out of last year that had to get closed with a lot of one-time funds. And so that is lingering. It is smaller, but it's lingering within this current year's budget. It's a $2.3 million deficit right now, which is large. Like, that is not a small, like, cut around the edges kind of situation. So luckily, and we have half the year left to try and work towards closing it, so we have time, but there's a lot that needs to be done to close it. The primary areas in which that have been highlighted as being part of the causing the deficit are utilities. That's just a historically underfunded structural deficit kind of within that line item. Special education broadly, special education transportation in particular is another one. And then substitute coverage. Those are ones that have been highlighted as particularly kind of out of bounds. And again, those are also ones that are really difficult to stop because, as you said, special ed transportation, that's one of those mandated ones. Utilities, it kind of, a lot are what they are. I mean, there's some capital improvements that could be done to try and tighten up things, but like those aren't things we're going to be able to change within this winter or school year likely. And then substitute coverage, you got to have teachers in front of kids. So unless there's something else to reduce the number of absences, which again, that's really challenging. That's not an easy thing to change in terms. So those are things. I think one piece that we've been concerned about in looking at this is what does this mean for FY26? Because obviously we don't want this. This is a continuation of issues from last year, and again, it has shrunk, but it's still continuing, and so we don't want this to carry forward into future years, especially if we're going forward with an override request, like let's solve these problems now. It continues to feel good about kind of where things are trending with what have already been kind of put within the FY26 budget, so I think that is good. And again, we are meeting in a couple weeks, the February 5th, and so at that time we'll have another conversation. Peter and Katie are continuing to talk internally around how to close this, and they'll come back on that 5th with kind of a plan of here are all the things that will need to happen in order to close a gap of this size. It is possible that the things necessary to close a gap of that size are so significant or so disruptive that this group might think that they are not worth really enacting and doing, and a better choice of action would be to go to the select board or the town administrator to ask for an additional allocation of funding within the current year. And obviously would be, I think, within every other ask we are doing, very challenging to do, and certainly not something we are thinking of doing, and we need to do everything we can to close it within our own power. But just think that needs to be said, because that obviously was a huge shock to everybody when that occurred last July for the $4 million deficit. So questions on these are not fun updates here.
We have a lot of fun committee reports.
I just do not today, yeah. Again, I think all these things are unfortunately tied. They're just tied together with how we have underfunded our schools for the past several years, and we need to make a big correction with this.
I mean, I personally feel confident having you kind of leading this and advising us as best as, and how you think it makes most sense. I think the process that you've gone through of educating us from the very beginning with the basic terms of finance that I had no idea about, which was really helpful. So I'm confident you know what you're doing. So I personally look to your guidance in terms of what the best way forward is, and I think we as a committee should support that, in terms of, fixing this once and for all and then moving forward, so it's no longer this thing that we have to deal with every year.
Yes.
And I think we have good line of sight right now, so I think that we're in a tough place and we recognize that, but I also think we have I think Mark articulated a good plan, and I think if we can land into FY26 strong, I mean, as Mark mentioned, we are working with our administrators to, we're freezing everything we can right now. We're meeting with all of our department heads to look at ways we can find revenue that potentially doesn't need to be spent for this current year. So we're doing everything we can to work within, and then also save where we can. But it is a big number, and there are certain things that potentially are not required, but would be so significantly impactful to students that wouldn't make sense to do. So that's definitely a lens we're looking through too.
Yeah.
Parents as volunteer substitute teachers.
Turn down the heat next weekend.
Don't turn on the lights. No lights.
No lights. Candlelight.
Send kids home, school with a flashlight.
If
We can do it.
If you keep your heat at 62 at your house, you can't turn your office up to 72.
No.
Keep it at 62 here
Exactly,
too.
Oh, goodness.
Sad.
Yeah.
Sad state of affairs.
Yes.
To be having to joke about that type of thing, but it's true.
But one thing that I would like to say, in the last 4 hours that we've been here, just kind of hearing the ways we're improving things and putting systems in place so that this is a non-issue going forward. I really appreciate that. I think just hearing about the MTSS presentation and the budget plan and the improvements at Pierce, it's very promising. I know the future looks bleak, but it still feels promising, and I'm great, at least we're thinking about it and we have a direction. We just now need to get the support that we need to go there.
Good reframe.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Thank you, Anna. That's a positive spin to kind of bring closure to this report. But you have one vendor warrants. Do we need to vote on those now?
Yeah, I signed both of these.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve vendor warrant 27 in the amount of $801,319 payable on 1/16/25, and a motion to approve vendor warrant 28 in the amount of $536,085.24 payable on 1/23/25.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
For school building committee, is there a report for tonight? I mean, I think there's a key update just regarding the warrant articles.
Yeah, school building met. They met about public records complaint violation that they're dealing with. That's from kind of years ago. But yeah, the update is the 2 warrant articles. Obviously, one is ours, not school building committee, but also the school building committee one for the funding. Both went, had an initial presentation by Peter, Lizzie, and I for the school committee one, and then Sean O'Rourke, I, and our OPM for the school building committee one in front of the warrant committee. So had initial question and answer sessions on that. They did not vote on it. It's possible they'll vote on it at their meeting tomorrow, because I think they're going to probably have some more follow-up questions when we get to the next update, where some folks are going in front of warrant committee tomorrow. So that's the only update on school building.
What date were you in front of the warrant committee? Do you remember? What date?
Were we in front of the warrant committee?
Mm-hmm.
It was last Monday.
Yeah.
14th?
The 13th, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, because today's Wednesday.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, 13th.
So we were So is that all for school building?
I was in there, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it for
So
school.
just sort of segueing into the capital really quickly, improvement committee report, just for you all to be up to speed. As Mark mentioned, we are going actually back before warrant committee tomorrow night. Peter and I and Anna will be there on a separate article, which is the one on the Cunningham Collycott project. So the good news out of Capitol was actually that there was consensus there last week to move forward for the select board and the warrant committee to consider an article for the February town meeting for that additional capital request, which we had proposed in October. And so we don't need to approve the particular language of that article, which Nick Milano was going to be drafting, because we already put forward the request through a formal vote that we took. Just to let you know, though, that will be sort of discussed tomorrow night. We'll have the opportunity to answer the warrant committee's questions about it. And then again on Tuesday, when they'll also be talking about the FY26 budget override, they will also, at select board, be considering this article for February town meeting, which is the request submitted by school committee for the Cunningham Collycott project, the additional funding to complete that project. So that's that update.
Does that mean they could start construction like over the summer break?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of other things that have to happen, but yes, that's the goal.
But yeah.
And I
it's
have
more likely if it doesn't happen in May.
Yeah. So we're not going to vote on this tonight. I don't have the article warrant, the language back yet from the town. We'll just stay in touch about this, and if it turns out to be a fluid situation where somehow we do have to take an action just to make sure that this follows the process to get on that February warrant, if anything happens, I will definitely reach out, keep you all updated, and if we have to come together to address that, we will. But that's kind of where it stands right now, so that's promising. All right, it's 11:01. Do we want to approve the minutes, or should we just?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of January 8th, 2025.
Okay.
Second.
There was a second?
Yep.
Val? Okay. All in favor? Okay, great. So we'll talk about the next agenda. If you have items to add, you can let me know clearly from this meeting. We have FY26 budget. That's going to be our main one. We will also be talking about the calendar again with a revised draft. And other things you can just send to me so that I can make sure they get reflected. And thanks everybody. Sorry for the long meeting, but appreciate everybody's engagement tonight.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Anna, all in favor? Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
It's still 11:01. Good night.